Hello guys, I'm Paul with the Best Tech, and today we are building out this to-do app using Riverpod and Flutter. So this will be our onboarding, and we've got our login feature. I'm gonna log in quickly. United States. And we have our little OTP screen. Yes, and we've got our home page where we can add to-dos. We can set a date. We can set a start time, say 45. We can set an end time. We can submit that. And once it's 12:45 for the start time, we'll receive a notification. To do one, just to do. Alright guys, so first things first, we are going to start with setting up our Flutter project. So to start things out, we're going to go with Flutter. I'm guessing you already have Flutter installed. If you don't, you can go to flutter.dev. I think that is. You can go to flutter.dev. Let me see quickly. Yes, you can go to flutter.dev and visit there and get started. I think that shows you how to install. Yes. So for every platform, we have instructions, right? We have instructions to set up Flutter for your environment, for your development environment. So that said, after you're done setting up Flutter and you add your Flutter to your system path, to your environment, your SDK should automatically be fetched over here. I think it should automatically be fetched over here. If it doesn't, there's a bunch of tutorials online because that's not what we're here for today. So I'm just going to jump right into and go to next. We are going to call this to do. So also one thing to know, if you don't want your projects to run into issues along the line, because at some point in your project you're going to have to do some maybe command line stuff or something, or running Flutter pubget, anything at all that triggers the command line. If you do not follow the standards of naming your Flutter project, your module will be badly named, and that will affect you when you're doing stuff. So the convention is using lower camel case, no dashes. I don't think dashes are allowed. I'm not really sure about dashes, but I'm very sure that there should not be any spaces. So there shouldn't be any spaces at all in your naming. It should all be together. So I think this should be alright. So we can have to do that. Right, this should be okay because I've got underscore. So no, this isn't camel case. Sorry, this is um snake case. This is called a snake case because it looks like a snake, right? It's got all those joints, right? Joints, right? You could also, I think you could also use camel case. For example, we've got our studio projects over here. This is my project location. You can save your project anywhere that you want to, but we can also use camel case, so we could just simply have to do that. But then, conventionally, everyone that I know of uses um, snake casing, right? So you can leave the rest of these as they are. If you wanted to, in order to make your applications unique, you can change the organization name, right, to your name. So usually it would be something like co dot. If my name is Paul, it would be co dot Paul. If it was John, it would be co dot Paul, co dot John, sorry. And then in your application, Flutter will automatically append the name of your application. So after we create this, it would be something like co.paul.todo app. But so you don't add that yourself, you just add your organization name over here. So my organization name is the best tech. So um, ours is going to be a com, not a co. So it's com dot the best tech. So you might be wondering why it's not the best tech dot com, right? We usually flip them. This was the case where even if you used thebesttech.com, it would usually just flip them and put this here and then add it the other way, right? Just it would reverse it. So then everyone just started putting this one first conventionally. So I don't think I've actually never tried putting it after, but I know that before, even if you put it after, it would automatically bring it before it. So just automatically everyone just started following that because it looked cool, I guess. I don't know. And then so we can leave these ones as they are. Um, and we can also choose to create the project offline. You can see this over here. It says when created, the new project will run on selected platforms. So you can deselect whatever you don't need. I don't think I'm going to have to run this on Windows, Web, macOS, or Linux. So it wouldn't create the extra folders for you. So when we actually are done creating the application, you will see on your file viewer on the left side of your IDE, you see all folders created automatically after this process that we're about to complete. So if you check these ones, then it will configure your projects to be able to run on these platforms, and that will in turn create more folders for you. So since I know for sure that this project is only meant to run on mobile devices, I'm just going to deselect all of these because I don't need them, and I'm going to enable this project to run offline. And I think that's it. Yes, that's it. And we can just go create. The project is getting created. Give it a bit. And there we go. We've got our project done. Alright, so as I told you previously, on this side, alright, give me a bit, I've got to increase my font. I think this should be okay. Yeah, that's better. Alright, so as I told you before, if I hadn't done this, if I hadn't deselected Linux, Web, Windows, and the rest of them, you would have seen the same way we can see Android and iOS over here. We would have had Linux, Windows, Web, and every platform because that is what Flutter is about, um, cross-platform development. So, but we've got a less clustered a less cluttered workspace, and that's beautiful. That's perfect. That's what we want every time. So as I told you before, usually after creating that organization name, we automatically have the project name or the module name attached to your organization name. So if we come into our build gradle, we can see we've got com.thebesttech.todo app. So this was automatically added. I didn't do anything here. So also you also have to familiarize yourself with these structures with your build Gradle. We've got two build Gradles. We've got a build Gradle in your Android folder. So this is directly inside of the Android folder. You can see it right here. And then we also have another build Gradle inside of the application folder. When we start getting into the nitty-gritty of it, we might have to edit stuff in here in order to make our applications work. Also, I think there's one more thing inside of our source main Android manifest. We will also be playing around in here as well. So we should just get ready for all of that. So without further ado, let's begin our project setup. So first of all, I'm going to come in here into my Pubspec YAML. So it's right in your folder structure, in your file structure. You can just come here in the very root of your project. You can see Pubspec YAML, and you can see all of these comments. So we are going to delete all of these comments. I am going to teach you a trick to delete all of these comments pretty quickly, and that is hitting command on Mac and control on Windows. So whenever I say command, then you just know the equivalent on Windows or Linux or whatever other operating system you're using is probably control. Whenever I say control, if you're on Mac, then it's command. So I'm just going to do command R. Command R means replace, or however you want to replace something or some in your file, I think. So I'm going to hit Command R and I'm going to select this, the regular expression. So select that. I'm going to deselect the match case because it's not important. So what we're trying to do, we're trying to say, all right, find me everywhere. So normally when we search for something like publish to, so it finds us publish to, and I can type in something to replace publish to, right? This is how replacing works. So if I typed in publish at, then it will replace publish to with publish at, but let's not do that now. That's dangerous. So I'm going to delete that. So what we're trying to replace is just these comments. I'm trying to delete every comment. So using regular expressions, we can just find every single line that starts with this symbol. So this symbol turns anything into a comment, right? So if I add that over here, it turns it into a comment. If I wanted to comment out a line, I can just put my cursor on that line, anywhere on that line, and hit Command or Control / boom, and it automatically comments out that for me. And this is why IDEs are beautiful. So no matter where I am, no matter what sort of language I'm coding in, the moment I hit Command or Control / my IDE automatically detects what language I'm writing in and uses the proper commenting symbol in front of it. So now we know that our commenting symbol for YAML is the £. So I'm gonna write pound. So it finds every pound. So if I just replace every pound with empty space, it will just delete them. But then we want to delete the entire comment, the entire line. So how we do that is dots. Dots means dots, as we can see, right? Dot just selects the next line. So, but then we don't just want the next line after the £, we want the entire line to the end of it. So we're going to add asterisks. So the asterisks will select the entire line, and then so we can just delete the entire line, right? So there's another trick. So first of all, let me show you this. When I replace everything, you can see it's all gone, right? But then there's still all of these empty spaces. You can still, using regular expressions, remove those by adding a new line. So it replaces that and every new line after it. So this will replace that and every new line after it. But the problem with this is that I don't know if this is the same problem in VS Code, but then in Android Studio, when you do that in your Pubspec YAML, particularly, it will disorganize the Pubspec YAML and destroy the indentation, as you saw, earlier. Look, it's all red and the indentation is a mess, which we don't want. So what I usually do is I just, for Pubspec YAML, any YAML files that I want to remove comments from, I just ignore that, right? And I replace all. I ignore the new line, and I just do that and manually do this. But then for every other thing in our Dart file, we can use the new line, because Dart has got the Dart files has got an auto formatter, and we can just automatically format that. So I'm going to make this. So this is where you will add your project configurations. If you wanted to use a package for your project, you can add that here. If you wanted to use a font, you can add that here. If you wanted to use whatever you wanted to use, you can add it here. So I'm just going to let's close this out, the replacer, and then I'm going to go into my lib folder, and we can see main, right? So I'm going to go into the main folder. We can delete the test folder because we don't need it. So inside of my lib main, we can see there's a lot of comments as well telling us about how this sample code works, but we're not interested in this because we're going to be building our own. So like I told you before, the replace can work by replacing new lines, right? So it doesn't leave spaces. So if I repeat the same trick here, this time the sign for comments isn't a pound, the sign for comments is a double forward slash. So it finds everything with a double forward slash, and when I replace all, replaces them still leaving spaces. But we don't want that. We want to replace everything, including new lines, because in Dart, even if it messes us up, we can easily see it messes it up. But then the beauty of this is that we can just simply hit reformat code with Dart format, and it does that, right? So sometimes you might see me doing stuff, writing code for a bit, and then automatically the lines get formatted without me actually doing this. Whenever that happens, know that on my keyboard I hit the command alternate L keys. So control alternate L, control alt L. That will automatically format your code for you. So when I do that, control alternate L, it automatically formats it. There's a different key combination to do it on VS Code, but I'm not a big VS Code user, so I don't know how that works over there. If you're a VS Code user, you can leave the shortcut for formatting in the comment section below, so that people who use VS Code can know what to do. So I'm simply gonna run this little itsy bit of code that we've got. So let me connect my phone, my device. I'm simply gonna connect my device quickly. You can use your simulator if you've got any simulators, but I don't have any simulators that I've created. So I'm just gonna use my physical device, right? I've connected it. There you go. Right, so that's side by side. Do you know what? Should I do it this way? Do you know what? Let this always be up, one layer up. Let's do it this way. Give me a second. Right, alright, let me zoom this one out and bring you to the side. Through about that, guys. Yes. Alright. I think that's perfect now, so I'm gonna run this. Yes, 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 yes. So we cross our fingers and wait for it to run. All right, so the application is starting. Right, there we go. So as we can see, there's a few. This is our little application. Let me mess around with it a little bit. Yeah, so that is the default Flutter page, whatever. Alright, so first things first, we are going to set up this page. So the first thing that we're going to set up on this page would be here. So this is our Flutter entry, our Dart entry point, the void main function. So that is why you can also see this little run button over here. So this tells Dart, because we're writing in Dart, this tells Dart that this script we're writing, this is the first thing you should look for. Even without us having to call this function, Dart already just calls this the moment that we run this script, right? So this is the first thing we call, and you can see Flutter always wants a material app returned over here. So this my app is returning a material app, and we in turn feed it to the run app. So we can edit this out. I don't know, I don't really want to delete all of this, but I just want to edit it out. And let's call it to do app. I'm just going to call it that, to do application. Makes total sense, Paul. I think the rest of these get to stay except this home page. So the first screen, if you remember from what I've shown you, was the onboarding. So we need an onboarding, not a home page. So the home means the first thing to show when your application starts. This is where you built it. This is the first thing you built, the first thing you want your users to see when they come in. So I'm also just going to call it, no, it's onboarding. Onboarding screen, right? So this is what will be here basically. So in order to create this, I will have to explain the architecture for this project. This project uses the model view controller architecture. So if you don't know what architecture basically is about how we arrange our files in our folders, how we arrange our code files, our source code in respective folders, right? So this defines the structure of our project. So if we have maybe an authentication feature, then we would have the same structure in which we arranged the folders of the authentication feature will have that same structure in other features. So if we also have a to-do feature, so we basically have different features. So when you're building an application, you break it down into different features, right? I've shown you an onboarding, right, where we introduce the user to the application and tell them, all right, this is what's going to happen, this is how the application works, and so forth and so on, right? That's an onboarding, and then we have the other feature, the login, where you log in, where you sign up or whatever, and then we had the actual to do where we could add to do and so forth. So when you take an application project, you break it down into different features. You break it down. This is the um this is the way to program. This is how programming works. This is the point of needing a programmer, because we see stuff in smaller chunks. We take a problem. The problem is our project, right? Build me a to-do application. We take it, we break it down into smaller chunks, and we solve each chunk one after another, right? So the first chunk that we're going to deal with, the first smaller piece that we're going to deal with, will be our onboarding. So we have an onboarding feature. So the model view controller architecture. So the architecture is basically how we arrange the the files inside of the folders, what folders we choose to show. All right. So for example, if we had, let me create a new folder, a new file. Let's call it what am I going to call it? I'm going to call it feature. So we have our little features, right? Inside of features, we are going to, all right, let me create these folders one after another so I don't confuse you. So we're gonna have a directory, we're gonna call it features, right? Inside of features, we will have all of our features. So we'll have one feature called onboarding. Let me make that snake case, onboarding. Inside of the features, we'll also have maybe authentication, right? Authentication. Inside of the same features, we'll also have our to do feature, right? No, sorry, I created a file. Sorry, delete. Right, so we have these three features. So these are the sub components of our application. All three of them will come together to make a to-do application, to make our full to-do application. Now, where the architecture comes in is how we place our files. Because remember, we have a backend. We'll be talking to a backend in order to store the to-dos that users create. We'll have the part of the UI, the user interface that the user sees. We'll write code for that as well. So how do we separate these, and then how do we finally bring them together? This defines our architecture. Our architecture is simply how we arrange these and what folders. And the reason why it's called an architecture is because it's repeated over in every feature. So even authentication, we had a feature for our UI. I'm going to call that views because this is what the user sees. Views will have views, and when we want to talk to the backend, we have another directory called repository. So the repository will talk to the backend, and then the view will show the user um, what they want to see. It will show the user um, the the display, the user interface, everything, right? This is where we put our codes that will show them everything. This is where we put our codes that will talk to the backend. But then how does the view know what's happening, right? So if the user tapped a button inside of the views that asks for to see all, or say to add a to do, right? To add a new task, how do we know, or how does our UI know where to put that task, right? How does our UI know how to handle that task, right? So we already have the backend code here that will store that task for us in the database when it receives it. But then how does our UI talk to this person, right? So it's bad practice for our UI to talk directly to the backend, which is this guy. So this guy isn't really the backend, so let me call him the middleware, right? So he's the middle and he speaks directly to the backend, and then our views needs a way to talk to him. But in order to show the views from this person who's receiving direct fire from the backend, we will create a middleman to talk to the repository. So the views say user taps a button, says add add whatever. Let me see. Let me give you an example with this one that we've got here. User taps a button and says add one more to this number. Right. This little tap that you see will send something to the back end. Right. If this was hooked onto a back end, it will send something to the back end, and it will tell the back end, all right, whatever number that you've got, right, add one to that number, because this is what the user wants. So when that's happening, this person, this view, does not directly tell the repository, hey, my user wants to add one to the number. So tell the backend, look, we want to add one to whatever number that you've got. No, that does not happen, right? It's dangerous. So what we do is we introduce a middleman called a controller. The controller controls the traffic. The controllers are red light, right? Are traffic lights or our traffic warden, whatever controls the traffic, the flow of traffic. The controller is our, as its name implies, the controller, it controls. So we're gonna have a controller, right? So the controller will control. The controller will be between the views and the repository. So when we tap a button here, we tell our controller, look, hey, we want to add one more to 21 to make it 22. The controller will say, all right, give me a bit. Let me check my protocol. Let me check what the programmer has given me. If we have anything that handles that, and it checks, and it will see, all right, yeah, we have that installed, sir. So then it will tell the repository, hey, repository, look, we have this installed, and this person wants it. So can you give it to me? Let me give it to him. The repository says, all right, hold on a bit. Let me talk to the backend. The repository tells the backend, hey, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, the backend doesn't necessarily have to be a server or a database somewhere on the internet. It could be a local, something local, right, on the user's device. It could be something stored on the user's device. So but then this is still considered the outside world, right? Anything that goes outside of the application to get information or to send information outside of the application of our current Flutter application, this person handles it. The repository handles it. So the repository will say, all right, give me a bit, let me talk to the outside world. So the repository will tell the outside world, all right, look, give me this, right? I want to add one more to 21. Whatever you have, right? You have 21, right? Let me add one more to it. So it will add 1 to 21. The outside world will reply and say, all right, when you add 1 to 21, the result is 22. So I have 22 now. Now go tell your user. The repository runs back to the controller and says, all right, the person responded, right? He said he's got 22 now. So he feeds that back to the controller, and the controller feeds that back to the view, to this person, and this person says, all right, let's show it to the user, and then it shows it. He shows whatever number he's got to the user. Similarly, when we've got an error, when we've got a little error, so the repository has run on his little errands to ask the outside world, all right, please, have you got 21 to add to my one that I've got to make it 22? And then the outside world says, all right, do you know what? You've made a mistake. All right, this isn't how to talk to me. You don't have any respect. Leave me alone. And it sends our repository back with a 404 error. 404 basically means there's a problem with your request, right? You've messed up, right? You messed up, bro. So meaning that we messed up. So meaning our repository has spoken to the outside world in a way that the outside world doesn't like, because our repository does not know the proper way to speak. So it will return with an error, and then this error will be given back to the controller. It will tell the controller, look, you told me that we had this installed. You checked your protocol and you told me that the developer taught us how to talk to the outside world. But whatever the developer told you was wrong. That isn't how to talk to them, because they told me that I've made a big mistake. And then the controller says, all right, give me that. Let me tell the user. And then it feeds it back to the user, that is to the view. And the view will say, all right, user, there you go. There's an error. All right. You've either done something wrong, or the person who wrote my code has done something wrong, and then it just feeds it back to the user, and the user sees that error that breaks all of our hearts when we see them, the blue screen of death, the 404 page not found, or whatnot, and then it's up to you, the developer, to come back and know where to fix it. So this is where you just go and say, all right, since there's an error, I know exactly where that is, right? That will be in our repository, because the repository is the person who I taught to talk to the outside world. So I have to go teach the repository how to talk to the outside world properly. And then the controller only holds the list. The controller is more like our secretary. It holds the list of the things we can do, right? If we can tell the outside world to add a to do, then the controller is simply the person who knows, all right, do we have this installed? Yes, we have add to do install. So hold on view, let me tell the repository, and then when the repository brings it back, it just gives it back to the view. So this is how an architecture works. This is what an architecture is all about. It's all about how you arrange your files. This person talks to the user, this person talks to the internet or whatever outside world factor that we've got, and this person bridges that communication between the two of them so that this person doesn't directly talk to this person, because sometimes the results that this person brings back is too raw for us to handle. So this person will bridge that gap and handle it, make it a lot prettier, and send it back to this person. So now that we know that, since we have our little authentication, we're not going to be doing authentication yet, and we're going to start with our onboarding. Right, so I'm going to create a new Dart file here. That will be in our views, right? So in our views, we will have an onboarding screen, right? Inside the onboarding screen, we will have a stateless widget. So first things first, before you create your widget, you have to import material. So material.dart, that is what we've imported. It's simply package Flutter material.dart. This is the material.dart. Flutter is open source, so you can hold down command on your keyboard or control on your keyboard and click on whatever. Look, it's highlighted because I've got command held down. So when you click on that, it takes you to the source code. So you can see everything that the material library is exporting, meaning these are the things it's exposing to us. So we can use anything from in here, a page, we can use a pop-up menu, we can use a data table, we can use whatever that we want. We can use literally anything in here, a desktop text selection, a divider, a drawer, whatever we need is being exported by the material library. If it's not being exported by the material library, we either create it ourselves or we look for another library that is exporting that thing to us or contains that. So we could have a lot of libraries, right? We could have, what else can we have? I don't know, package. You can see a list of stuff that we've got. We've got a lot of stuff over here. We've got even vector maths, math for mathematics or whatever the heck you want to do with this. I don't know. We have geometry and whatnot. So there's a lot of stuff, but we're building a Flutter application, so we're using the material. So we're going to start off by building out the material. So right, so after that we create our widget. So Flutter uses widgets, right? So every single thing you see on your screen is a widget. 21 is a widget. You you have pushed this button this many times. Colon is a widget. The plus button on the bottom right corner is a widget. The Flutter demo homepage and the purple background, they're just widgets. Everything is literally a widget, right? So we create a widget and we show it to the user. So what do we want to show a user? We want to show a user an onboarding screen. But then remember what I've told you. As a programmer, you have to break stuff down. So even though we've broken down our project into 3 smaller chunks, right, we still will have to do more breaking down, right? So we've already, even on the authentication chunk, the chunk called authentication, we've got 3 other smaller parts called controllers, repositories, and views. So these are separate things. The repository talks to the outside world. This person talks to the user, and then this person is the middleman between the both of them, right? So we've broken them down into 3 other parts, right? And then we will also bring them together. So we'll bring these 3 together at some point in the code, and then these 3 will make up the authentication because we've brought them together. So now we'll have one thing called authentication, and that thing will be a part of a bigger chunk of features, right? So when we also bring authentication, onboarding, and to do together, it will make up the to do app, this app over here. So now let's start with the onboarding. Inside of the onboarding, we've got even smaller bits. That would be controller where I'm also gonna have our repository, sorry, and we have our view, right? So we are dealing now with the view chunk, right? Inside of the view, we have the onboarding screen. The onboarding screen is its own chunk. Remember that I told you that everything is a widget. So meaning that not only are the singular elements their own widgets, but the entire page itself is a widget. Do you see how amazing that is? So it's a widget of widgets. So the page is a big widget, and then we have smaller widgets inside of it. So we're going to create the first big widget. So even inside of our UI code, we have what do you call them? We have I don't know, a breaking down going on as well. So we are going to take a screen, tear it apart into smaller chunks, even tinier bits and pieces, and then we are going to create solve these problems one after another. So what is the problem that we currently have? We have one huge problem. We need an onboarding screen. How are we going to break it down? So first we're going to have the onboarding screen. Inside of the onboarding screen, we will have our little things. So the onboarding screen, let me pull the onboarding screen up. Give me a second. All right, so I've got this up, right? So this is what our onboarding is meant to look like, right? So we've got an image. So we're going to break this down into smaller chunks. So we've got an image, and we've got this little title. We've got this thing that looks like a subtitle, and then we've got this skip and this other thing, and we've got these two things that manage to swipe and all that. So these are all smaller bits and pieces. So for this we have, first of all, we're gonna have what am I gonna call that? So we have an image, and after image we have what do I call it? A title. And sorry. And after that we do have a subtitle. And after that we have our little skip, and then we have our, I don't know, this is actually called, I think, the swipe indicator or something. Don't worry about the name, but then just know that it tells us just to show the user where they are in the page currently, right? So we've got these things, and these are the smaller chunks that make up the onboarding screen. So we're going to start with the first one, right? The onboarding screen. In order to create a widget, we start by creating the widget, right? So it's a class. I'm expecting that you already have some idea of how OOP works, object-oriented programming, because this is what Flutter is about. So from the onset, you're already using inheritance, right? Because everything that we create on our own is going to inherit from Flutter's already defined stateful widget inside of the material. So when we look here, let me see, boom. In here, I think it's in widgets.dart. If we look in widgets, you'll see that widgets is its own library, exporting a lot of stuff as well. So this is a lot of stuff to deal with, right? So let me find it. Sheesh, that's a lot. I don't think that's in here either. I think it's also nested deeper. So I will show you when I actually create it. So we can say that the class. So first of all, let me delete this, right? So let's assume that you haven't imported that and we are trying to create our own widget. So in order to create our widget has to be a child of Flutter's widget. So our widget is going to be called the onboarding screen. Let's make that proper screen, proper camel case. So we're going to call it onboarding screen, and it's going to extend, right? Extending means it's going to be like this person, right? Who is it going to be like? It's going to be like a stateless widget. So we have two types of widgets, stateful, come on, widget, we have stateful widget, this one, and we also have a stateless widget. But for now, we're going to use a stateless widget. And we can see we also even have this Cupertino.dart, which was automatically imported. If we delete that, we see that there's a red. It wants some import. We have two options. We can import widgets, which I've shown you, widgets.dart. We have material, which I've shown you. We also have Cupertino. Cupertino is like material, but then it's for iOS, right? So remember that Android devices have different feel to them. They have different user interfaces to them than what iOS devices have. So Cupertino has similar things that Material has, but then it designs them in a way that an iOS device would look like. So we're creating our first big widget. It's going to be a stateless widget, and for that we have to import the Material library, which contains it, right? And what are we going to do? We're going to create the constructor for it. So like I said, before you take on this course, you should already have some idea of what OOP, of how OOP works. Because yeah, I'm not going to explain it in this video at least. So how this works, when you hover over this, you can see it wants a key, right? A parameter named key. Why? Because its parent, a stateless widget, uses this a key, and stateless widget is also a child of what? Widgets. Remember I told you that everything is a widget in Flutter, including the screen itself. So the screen that we built, we were extending this. A stateless widget in turn extends a widget. So at the end of the day, we are creating a widget. At the end of the day, we're creating a widget at the end of the day. So a widget is this, right? So the widget goes on to extend these ones, but we never talk about these, right? Because on our level, we always end here. So even if we go beyond stateless and stateful widgets, we always end with these. These ones are just deeper stuff. You can see the deep. So we rarely ever dig this deep. So we can see here that the widget wants a key. It always uses something called a key. Here it is. So over here we also see that the stateless widget also collects that key and sends it over to the widget. So meaning that when we're also inheriting from the stateless widget, we also have to give it a key, right? So we can just say super.key because super means parent. So we can collect a key from the when we're using this screen wherever we use it, and then if we do pass a key, because this, if we wanted to force ourselves to pass a key, we can make it required, but then we don't want to force ourselves because the stateless widget isn't forcing us, right? It's not by force over here because there's no required over here, so we can also use it without forcing ourselves to pass the key. You can Google how the keys in Flutter work and what they do, because that would be another longer explanation. So I'm just gonna get onto it. So we can also see this is still red. Why? It wants an override. So you can either click here to create one missing override, which will create a build function for you. So we override, and this will be polymorphism, right? We're morphing the functionality of the build function that comes from the widget class, right? We can see over here, this is it, right? This is the build. So it doesn't have any body. It's not been defined. I can't edit that because this is from Flutter source code. But then you can see it doesn't have any body. So it's our job to give it a body. It's our job to override it and give it a body. So over here, it provides us with something, though. It provides us with a context. So we will use this context to do a lot of things, right? This context is so important. It tells us where we are in the widget tree. So if we were in an onboarding screen, inside of the image screen, inside of the image widgets, inside of a different widget, each of them will have their own context. But then the context will tell us where we are. So if we were using this image's context, then our app automatically knows that we are in the image widget, right? And it will do whatever we want to do with the context to that image. So we're gonna go ahead, and what does it want? It wants us to return a widget. So we'll return something that is also a widget. What does it want? So basically, the first thing, the first layer, the canvas where you draw your UI on is usually the scaffold. We call it a scaffold, as the name implies. It's a scaffolding, right? If you're into building and construction, you've probably heard that term before, but it's a scaffold. And what does scaffold have? A scaffold has this thing called a body, right? We can see body, so we can give it a body. The body is, as it implies, the body of the screen. It's basically just the body. So inside of the body, so now we've created our onboarding screen. So I'm just gonna I don't know, leave this to be a container or whatever. So we've basically created our body, right? When I do run this app, when I restart this application, sorry, there's an error. I have to import this over here. So after creating our onboarding screen over here, we also have to import it in order for this file to know what we're talking about. Because right now this file is saying, oh, I don't have any idea what you're talking about. What the heck is an onboarding screen? Because we've created this, so we have to import it. Because right, this, like I told you before, if it doesn't exist in the material, we either have to create it ourselves or download a package from the internet from pub.dev that uses it, or we have to find another library that Flutter provides that gives it to us. So this time I've imported ours, so I'm just simply going to restart this. And let's see what happens. This is our scaffold, right? This is what I've just created, the little scaffold. We can change its background color. Most of the names in Flutter are self-explanatory, so background color is simply the color of the background. For that, we need to have something called colors, dots. We can choose any color. So the colors is also from the material library. That is why we don't have to import anything. So when I search here, you can see we have color. Yes, this is it, colors. So we already have that from there. So when I do that and save this, we can see that we now have blue color. So it's blue. So this is basically the canvas where we start drawing stuff. So we're little babies, right? Our mum has bought us a little canvas to draw on, and now we have to start drawing whatever we want to draw, right? So let's start drawing then. So what is the first thing that we're going to draw? So as we saw earlier, we have this to draw, right? So we have an image, and then we have our little title, and then we have our subtitle, and we have these. So we're going to start from the image. So in order to build the image, we are going to remove this. And all right, do you know what? Let me just add that. Let me just add it straight. So we have something called an image.asset, and we will have this image. So we basically have to add this image to our project, and this is where one of our important setups come in. So we need a way to get this image that we have here, and show it over here, and put it over here, and tell it, all right, we're getting this image from the assets, which is our asset. I'll show you later. But then we also have a network option if we want to get it from the internet, right? So, but we're not getting this from the internet, we're getting it from our assets. So what we do is we create a new folder here called assets, and that is it. We put our images in here. So inside of assets, I'm going to create a new direct file, directly called images. And we're going to put all of our images in there, alright? So I think we have a few images for this project, so I'm just going to copy them over. Let me copy them over. You can find these images from the project source code. They're all there, so you can see the images that we have. We have a bell, we have notification, and we have our to-do. So we have these three images to work with. So now that we have them, one thing that we have to do to set them up so that our Flutter application knows where to find it is go into your Pubspec.yaml. The first thing that we edited, that we cleared out when we started the project, find it in your project root, come here, come down, make sure that you're on the same line with this user's material. If you don't if you're not sure, you can just indent all the way to the end and give 2 spaces, right? Or you can hit tab, right, and it will just indent it 2 spaces for you. So, but make sure just one indent away, just sorry, one tab away, right? So we're going to add something called assets. We can see it auto completes, and we're going to hit enter, and then we're going to put a dash. We're going to put asset. So yeah, it's going to be assets, the file structure. So we can just copy the. Do you know what? Let me just copy this. I'm going to copy the path, and we can see it's an assets slash images. So we're going to put that there. But then since this is a directory, and we're trying to tell Flutter to say, look, I want you to listen to everything inside of the images directory because I'm going to be using them. So don't just listen to this images, right? I'm not going to be using this directory. I'm going to be using everything inside of it. So we just add a forward slash and say, look, everything inside of this, I'm going to use them. So configure them for me. That is what the end forward slash means. So we are going to do that and run pubget. Usually for these to reflect, you have to restart your application. So I'm going to code start, stop it. So code boot means when I say code start, I mean stop it with the red button and run it again from scratch. Yeah, and now we've got some errors. Sorry, I'm going to stop that and fix them. So let's fix that before we go. So basically what you do is you find the image that you wanted to use. In this case, we want to use, which is it? Yeah, the to do. So we're going to right click and say copy path, and we're going to copy its path. We're going to close this, close that, come in here, create a string, and paste that path that we've just copied. All right, and then the Pubspec YAML will simply already configure these for us, so we don't have to worry. So that will all work. Geez, that's a lot of space. So after we do that, we are going to start the application. So while that compiles and while that runs, I'm going to tell you something, right? So these strings are really tricky, right? I personally dislike working with strings in Flutter, in programming in general, because they are tricky, and by tricky I mean they're really error prone. Just you could make one silly mistake to do's and your application will crash because there's no to do's in here, there's only to do. It has to be um pinpoint accurate. It has to be. So because of that, I really dislike working with strings, especially when I have to reuse the same string over and over and over again, right? So if somewhere else I need to use this image, right, called to do.png, meaning I will have to copy this, and if I don't, if maybe I've written a lot of code and I can't find this, and then I have to type it again from scratch. I have to type it from the beginning again. That will be really dangerous, right? Because I can make silly mistakes if I use it over and over. One thing that I personally like to do is I like to save every image that I have here in one file so that next time I can easily find them and without making mistakes so that I can just easily reference them. So I'm going to cut this away from here. I'm going to go into my library. Inside of before my features, I'm going to have a call. So yeah, inside I think I should create core in here. No, let me separate these. So I'm going to have a directory called core, and inside of core I'm going to have resources, new um directory. I'm gonna call it resources. This is resources, but instead of spelling it out long, you commonly see people write res instead, right? So inside of res, I'm gonna create a file, and I'm gonna call it. What am I gonna call it? Media res, because this will hold our media, our videos, our images. If we had videos, but in this project we don't have any videos. But I'm just telling you in case in your other project, you can just decide to call this res though, or you can call it image res, right? But then just generally we can call it media res if you were going to hold a lot of stuff other than images. But then in our case we're going to have images alone, so I'm just going to say image res, and I'm going to call it class image res, and I'm going to say that we have a variable. So we're going to create a variable called the what is it called? The to do. So how to create a variable? We start with final to tell it that this variable won't change, or we can put in the type. So since it's a string, we can say string to do is equal to, and we paste what we have, right? So but then since we want to create for all of them, we will have to do this string notification is equal to, and then we have to do the same thing over and over for each of them. So we can just save ourselves the trouble, right? Because remember, in order if we had a lot of images, then we would definitely have to do assets slash images slash notification dot png, and then we have to do that for, if we had 10 files, 10 images, we'd have to do that for all 10 of them. And this is also even becoming more error prone, right? So in order to reduce the amount of the amount of errors, we can just extract this little part, right? You can extract that little part and just say, all right, do you know what? Let me extract that and call it something like string base base image base or something. We could call it image base, and we can say image base is this asset slash images. So we can just in here we can just simply say, all right, image base will be over here. We'll use image base, and we simply have image base for what's the problem. Yeah, so as you can see, now we have an issue. Why? Because this is how Dart works, right? You can't use something that you've defined inside of another instance. So these are called instance fields or variables, instance variables, because they're in a class. So when you have a variable in a class, you can't use that same variable inside of the same inside a class again. So you could have something like a getter, right? I'm not going to confuse you a lot. We could do it this way, but that's just silly, right? That is we could do it that way, but then best practice, I'm going to tell you, you just want to make this entire class a static class. Do you know why? Because if it isn't static, then when I need to use the image res here, then I will have to instantiate the class and say image res dot before I do what I wanted to do, right? So if I import this, then I'll simply have, no, sorry, then I'll simply have image res dot to do, right? And it will give me my to do. But we don't want to have to create and invoke the class over and over, right? We just want, because we know that these will always be the same. We never changed them. These we're basically never going to use them, right? They might as well just be top level functions. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove our ability to instantiate this class by doing what? In Dart, in order to make something private, encapsulation, in order to encapsulate something, we add an underscore before it, right? So when we add an underscore before something, look, when I do image res dots, I can't find image base. So I can say image base dot image base. I can't find it. It doesn't exist, right? It will tell me, look, it doesn't exist, right? But it does exist. We know that it exists, but because I've made it private, then you can see, because it's private, then we can't see it outside of this file. So in order to make it so that we can't call this, because every class has a constructor, like what we've done here. This is our constructor for this class. So in order to take away, because if you ignore the constructor, then Flutter or Dart automatically creates a constructor. Everything implicitly automatically creates a constructor. So normally, even if you leave this alone, then there's a constructor to be had. So we can do this, right? Because it automatically does that. So in order to take away that ability, we do this image res dots underscore. We take that constructor and we make it private. So that way, this no longer works, right? So that way, we can directly say, all right, to do. But now that doesn't work again. Why? Because we can't use it with a static access. A static access means using a static instance in a class, right? So these variables aren't static. So meaning that we have to make them static. So we're just going to make them static, and static. What does static let us do? Static lets us do this. It lets us use a variable from a file, right, without having to initialize the file. All right. So in that case, even if we didn't hide this, even if this was a thing, even if the constructor existed, we could still do this. You can see we can either do this, and we'll see because it's static that we can't use it that way, right? So we can instantiate the class, but we can't use the static variables from the class. So we can only use the static ones if we remove the class invocation, the invocation being these things that shows that this is a constructor. So in that case, we can safely hide this because we know all of these are static, and since they're static, we can't even use a class constructor anyways because these ones are static. So we basically must use a static accessor. So we hide the constructor and just use a static accessor. So then we will make this one private because I don't want to see this outside of here, but I will never need this, right? The only things that I will need are these ones. So we are gonna have this. Since this is now static, we can use it because it's no longer just an instance variable. It's now a static instance variable, right? It's static, so meaning that I can use it inside of another static variable inside the same class, right? So we can use it in here, right? And we can, it says what you can make it final, so we're just gonna make it final. But then that is also bad practice because since we already have final or this, it will automatically get the type, so we no longer need this data type. But then we still have an issue because it's telling me that this can be a constant, right? So we can replace final with constant. Right, these are Dart basics, so I'm expecting that you already have some Dart knowledge before you started this course. So we're just going to make the static constants because they're all constants, and now we're reducing the probabilities of we're reducing the our error margin, so there's barely going to be any errors. So we have notification.png, we have to-do.png, and finally we're going to copy this. I'm just going to hit Control D on my keyboard to copy this line. I don't know what the shortcut is on VS Code. Every shortcut that I hear is for Android Studio. So you have to find out for other IDs that you're using. So we're just going to do this one for Bell. So we're going to say bell.png, and that's it. So in order to use this, we're just going to do to do, right? And this works. This works beautifully, as we can see, right? So, but then this isn't all there is to this, right? When we look at our application over here, we can see it's got this, and then it's got these under it. So in order to be able to do that in Flutter, sorry, we can have something called a column. So the column is as its name implies, a column arranges stuff on the vertical. So a column would do something like this, but then a row, after a column we have a row. A row will put stuff this way, right? On side by side, side by side, side by side, side by side, and that's it. Right, so this is the difference between a column and a row. But then over here we can see that we have these things vertically. So we want a column. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to create a column. I'm going to do this image assets dot to do. So now we have our little column. All right. So the column, if we want to center everything inside a column, we want to make sure that everything in a column is in the middle of the column. We use main axis alignment, and we use main axis alignment the center because main axis alignment wants what? A main axis alignment. So you can just check this and see. Even we can see if you don't know what it wants, sometimes you can just command click or control click, and you can see the code and see how it works. You can read through it. You also have the Flutter website, right? Flutter website, flutter.dev. It can teach you a lot. We also have Flutter cookbooks and everything. We have a lot of stuff. These documentation, we have cookbooks, we have development tools, we have tutorials. There's a lot of beautiful stuff. Give me a bit. You have these things, a lot of beautiful stuff to do here. So I'm going to continue with this. So we're going to center everything out. Let me go back to my application. All right, so we're going to center these. As you can see, it's been centered basically. So, but then I don't like how it's filled the entire screen. So I'm simply going to wrap it in a padding. A padding will add some padding around it. So when I put a padding here, padding takes something called edging sets. So we're going to use edging sets dot all, meaning that apply eight pixels on all sides, or all sides being top, bottom, left, and right. So we also have only to do singular ones, so we could make them left, and we can specify left, and we have right, and so forth. We also have symmetric, which is horizontal and vertical, and so forth and so on. So we're going to use symmetric because we only want to add some padding on the x-axis. That is on the left and on the right. So I'm going to use that, and I'm going to say 30. All right, so that adds some padding, 30. When I save that, you can see it adds some space here and here, which in turn shrinks the file, not the file, the image rather. So now we have that. Our code is coming together. So after this, we are going to have our text, right? So we have our little text. Our text will simply be a text widget. Yeah, let's just make it a text widget, right? And our text widget is going to say to do with Riverpods, and then we can see that up here when we save. To do with Riverpod, yay! And then so in order to make this text a little bit more pretty, because we can see this is not what this looks like at all. This doesn't look like this. So let's change this. Let's change what we have to this. So in order to do that, so we're gonna have something called style, right? And what does style take? Yeah, style takes a text style. And text style, with the text style, we can specify some properties. Some properties like what the size of the text, the font size. Sorry, not the style. The font size is going to be something called something like let me see, 30. We can save that. We can see the style, the size change to 30, and we can also see the font weight. That is how thick it is. So we have a lot of font weights. We have font weight of bold. We have font weight dot normal, we have and so forth, right? But then if you want to be a lot more specific, we have these ones. W font space, we have W1 all the way to W900, 100 all the way to 900. When you hover over this, when you hover over one of these pop-ups and you hit Control Command or Command Q on your keyboard, it will show you the documentation that describes what that property does. So when I click away and just leave my cursor over here on W, I can hit W5 or W. When I even start typing W, it opens up this pop-up, and I can hit Command Q, and that will show me what this is. And we can see 500 means medium, right? 500 is medium, and we can go down with our arrow keys and we can see that, sorry, because I've selected that one, or we can click on it, we can see that 400 means normal or regular or plain. This is a default that every text has. So if you don't specify a font weight, it defaults to 400, right? We have that, and we have 700, and this is bold and so forth. So you can either use this or we can use the other thing. So I'm going to go with 500 because 500 means what? Medium. And I don't think font weight has medium, does it? It doesn't. So we have bold, and we know that bold is 700, right? We have normal. We know that normal is 400, right? So we can see over here that normal tells us that normal is the default font weight, like I told you, and that's 400. So we want 500, which is medium. Right, so we want a W500, which is medium. We have also, let me save that first, and you can see it's got a lot fatter. And then we also have the color, and we can have, I don't know, colors.blue. right? Blue, and let's see. Yes, now we have blue. But this is in the style that we want, is it? This isn't even how this screen looks like. But then let's just go ahead and build it out with black first, and then when you leave this alone, it usually defaults to black. It all depends on your theme and configurations and that. But then that's not what we're here about today, is it? So we're gonna go on and define a new text as well. Sorry. And this text is gonna say, let's say, welcome. Do you want to clear tasks super fast with to do? Right, so we're gonna leave this one in. This is a subtitle as well, so you can see it's nasty. So also we can use a text style to make this one also beautiful. Right, we can add what do you call it? Font weight. We can add a font size first of all. Let's add a font size. Should we also make that one? What do we make it? Let's make it 16. We can add, let's save that and see 16. 16 gets a little bit bigger. We can add a font weight, and we can make it font weight dot 400. And 400 is also the same thing as normal. But then Flutter already defines normal for us, because Flutter defines normal and bold for us, because people usually use them. So right, so you define them for us. So this is just the same thing, right? You can see it's W400, Bose is also W700, right? So we can just, they've already defined them for us, so we don't have to start typing W400 or 700. So that saves that one as well. So remember that I told you this is the default, so you can see that when I saved, nothing changed because it was a default. So this is this is counterproductive, so I'm going to delete that, and I'm just going to have the color which I'm also just going to leave as black for now. So I think that sums up the column, yes. So now we have to make it look this way, right? We can see that ours doesn't look this way. This one, when it breaks, when the line breaks, it's centered, and this one is also centered. So let's do that. Let's do this. Center them then. First of all, let's do this over here too. Let's make this one text. We have a property called text align. So we have also, similar to font weight, we have text align. We can have start, left, center, and justify. So you can play around with these, but I just want to center all of them. So I'm just going to center and copy that, come here, paste it, and that's it. So they both get centered. So when they break, they go to the center. But now I also think that these boys also need to have some space around them. So this person also needs to have some space, and this person also already has a space. So instead of wrapping only the image in a padding, I'm going to copy this padding. So I'm going to remove this widget. I'm going to wrap the entire column in a padding, so the entire column is padded, so I don't have to repeat myself over and over. So I'm just going to paste what I've copied, and we can see, boom. Yes, so now we have the same line. So if you want to see it properly, you can go to your material app and you can set a property called debug show material grid. We can set that to true, we can save, and you can see this is right in line with this, and this, everything is in line. So you can see that perfectly lined up. So let me remove that property. You can use that if you want your stuff to be pixel perfect. But yeah, Flutter handles a lot of the pixel perfection for us. So which brings me to my next case, right? We can just add const everywhere because it wants us to do that. Right, so this is what we have currently, right? But then we know that we have different device types and device screens and everything. When this same application that looks so beautiful on my screen, yes, I know it's beautiful, right? When I run it on a device with smaller dimensions, so maybe a smaller iPhone or a smaller Android phone or even a tablet, right? All of these will look horrible. They will look disgusting and horrible. All right. So let me see. I can't really show you how horrible they can look, but you can try running them on devices with smaller frames. Um, if I went ahead to show you on different devices, then I would have to do extra configurations, which will make this video really long. So to avoid that, just take my word for it. This can actually get really disgusting. All right, it gets really disgusting. Also, but before I teach you how to consider other screens with your widgets, I wanted to show you something important. So if I didn't center my column, let's see, if I didn't center it, you can see that this image goes beyond this thingy that's on my Android phone, this little overlay from my Android. We don't want this. We always want this to be contained within the corners, within the safe areas, right? So this area isn't safe. So if I had an important information for my users, so maybe their account balance, imagine that this was a bank application and their bank balance was meant to be at the top, then meaning it would go in here, right? And they can't properly see that. So we want everything in our application to be contained here. So what we do when you want to do something like that, you can either go ahead and start wrapping with padding on the top. So we can just go ahead and say, don't mind this, right? This is just crazy stuff. But just I could go ahead and say top 20, and we can see it will bring it down on the top, right? By 20. We can just keep trying till it's within the bounds 50, till it comes down properly. And yeah, but then you're still not sure, because on other screens, on other phones, this might actually be longer than 50. You never know. Or it could be shorter than 50, and then you have too much space. You have maybe even on some phones it might not be there, and you just have too much space. So in order to avoid all of that, instead of adding it ourselves, you wrap your scaffold's body in a widget. Let me save this first. In a widget, yeah, in a widget called safe area. So wrap it with a widget, and I'm gonna call that safe area. And there we go. Let's see. Yeah, so automatically detects where that touches. If we also have a notch over here, so if this was long enough to get here, then it wouldn't let it go under this, or let anything under the notches cover it. So whatever notch that you have on your phone, it won't let it go into it. All right. So I'm also going to restore my main axis alignment here, center, and center the entire thing, because we don't want it to start at the top. All right, so we've got what we're looking for. So next I'm going to tell you how to make sure that all of these fit on every screen that they're put onto. Right, so if this screen were to be smaller, then this text will, it will manage itself. It will know what to do. It will know how to handle itself and everything else. So in order to do that, we have to use a package called screenutils. So, in order to add, remember that I told you that most of the stuff are in here already in the material, but then we don't have that functionality that we're looking for in material. So we're going to find it in an external package called screenutils. So we're going to go to a website called pub.dev. So let's go ahead and find what we're looking for. So we have a search bar over here, so you can search for stuff, right? We could search for auto scale screen or something, whatever. Resize. You can see we have responsive widgets and so forth and so on. We can search for auto size text or something. You can search and you just keep searching till you find what you're looking for. So we generally in the Flutter community, people use a package called screen utilities, right? This is basically a short for screen utilities, but it's called screenutils, right? So we can see we have responsive util, but this has too much less points. It's only got 2 points, so I'm just going to type it in. A lot of people have searched and tested and tried screenutils, and it works for them. And you can see it's got a whopping 3,000 likes, right? So it's really popular, 100% popularity. This is crazy, right? 3k likes. I'm just gonna add a light to it. Right, I'm going to add my own light to it, and then we're going to install it. So in order to install something from over here, you have to go to the installing tab and then check how to install it. So this is what they recommend we do, right? Flutter pub adds the name of it, right? So this will automatically add the latest version. In this case, it's 5.8.4. So after adding a package, you surely want to read the documentation, because sometimes you can't just add them. Sometimes you need to make some extra modifications. Yeah, you have to do some configurations or some what do you call them? Some setups on your project in order to make them work. And in order to do that, you have to read the README section. This section, the README, read it. This is the documentation. You read this, and then it tells you how to set it up in your project or how to use it. All right. So listen, this gives us an example. The first way, you must use it once in your application. So this tells us a lot of what we need to do and how we need to use this package. All right. So, but then without making you go through and reading this, I will just tell you what we need to do for this project, right? So if you need it for another project, you can just read through it and know what it can do and what it can't do. So we are going to have Flutter pub add. I'm going to paste that in, right? I can hit enter, and then this will automatically add it to my Pubspec YAML, right? It will add it here. We will see it appear here. But then after adding that, then we have to hit pubget, right? In VS Code, when you add a new package, it will automatically run pubget for you. All right, but in Android Studio, we don't have that functionality. So what I personally do is after writing flutter pub add flutter screenutil, I go ahead and say and flutter pubget. I'm using Linux, so this works um on my Linux command line. I think Linux uses bash or shell. I don't know what command line it uses, but I know that Mac also uses the same, so you can probably use and. But then I don't know how to chain commands in Windows. Let me see. So how to chain commands in Windows CMD. All right. So yeah. Apparently you can also do. Sorry. You can also do with and one and or two ands. Oh, you can go through Stack Overflow, search in the internet, and you can find it. All right. So if on your Android Studio, if you're on Windows, on your Android Studio, you could see something here called PS on this side before your actual name, before your actual console name. Sorry about this. You can see something called, you might see something called PS. Some people might not see it, some others might. If you see that, it means you're on PowerShell, right? So the way that you do this on command prompt is not the same way you do it on PowerShell. So we can check on Windows PowerShell. So on Windows PowerShell, it can be different. You can see how to chain multiple commands in the PowerShell. We can see they use the pipe symbol, the pipe sign. Alright, so it's different. So find out how yours is if you're on Android Studio, and you can just do this, and it automatically will add the package and run pubget for you. So we can hit enter, and after that, after adding the package, it will automatically run Flutter pubget for us. And there we go. It's run Flutter pubget, and we can. Yes, we can see Flutter screenutils has been added. Alright, so we're safe to go. So let's start using it. Let's first of all learn how it works and what it does. Alright, so we can come to the documentation. We can see a Flutter plugin for adapting screen and font size. Let your UI display a reasonable layout on different screen sizes. So it does some sort of I don't know, some sort of mathematics under the hood. So it doesn't precisely scale your given size to the device's size, but it does a reasonable amount of scaling to your fonts and to your whatever you use the screen utilities on. So this is how we use it, right? We import it in our file, like I told you. Now we've added an external library, so we'll import it the same way we've imported the other one, and then we simply come here, so they taught us how to use it. So there's some setup. Like I told you, sometimes you need to configure some things in order for external packages to work. In this case, this. When we have a look at this, we can see that they're in their main function, and in the main function they return a myapp. The myapp returns a screenutil that returns into a mature app. So this is what we're basically working with. So we basically have to make this change in the same file where we've got our material app. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so in the material app, let us just go ahead and copy this. Give me a second. So we see that the material app is being returned by this builder inside this screenutil init. So it tells us that you must either provide a builder, a child, or both, right? So you must actually provide a builder, all right? It's not optional. You always have to provide a builder, because when we go ahead and look, let me remove this. When we turn a screenutil init, right? And we look in here, we can see that let me in fact go in here, we can see that the builder is required. So we don't have any option to ignore that, right? So when we open this up, sorry, that had to be a comma. When we open this up and we see that this person wants to give us something, right? They're giving us a context and a widget. So they're giving us a context and a child widget, all right? So the context and the child widget, this context is the context they have inside of the screen utilities. We're not going to be using that in Dart. If you're not going to be using a variable that the framework is giving to you, you can replace that variable with an underscore to signify to Dart that you're not using it. All right, so because we can't leave it blank, and I just don't want to name it because we might have conflicting stuff, and I know I don't want to use this one. I want to use this context. So I will comment that out, and then we will also replace this one with an underscore because I don't care about the child. The screenutil init gives to me. So I will replace it with an underscore, but then since this name is already existing, then I will just give it 2 underscores, and then it wants me to return a widget. All right, so but the return type is widget, so it wants that widget, so I'm going to return a material app. Forgive me, this got removed, so we have our imports back. So what is the deal with that child? All right, so we have 2 options. We can give this a child, all right, and that child could be a material app. It would be your material app. So if you happen to choose to give this a child, by the time you're in the builder, if you had to use the child over here, you can do this in here, and then they feed you with that child that you've passed here. So that way, when you're done doing your stuff, do stuff here, you don't have to return material app again. They have simply given you a child, so you can return that child. But we can see that it gives us a red squiggly line, meaning there's something wrong. And it says that the return type widget question mark is not a widget. Alright, so meaning that this widget's child is nullable, meaning that it could be null. Alright, remember that we could totally ignore the child, right? And this would work, meaning that we could decide to leave the child as null, as without a value. This child, we could give it null and it works. All right. So since they do not know for sure whether you're going to leave a child blank because it's not required or not, so that is why this is nullable. So they're not sure whether you passed that. So in order for us to tell Dart and say, all right, listen, Dart, I'm sure that I gave a material app to my child. I'm sure that it's not null. We can do that by using an exclamation mark after the nullable variable, and that tells Dart, hey look, I know that this could be null, but I promise you that I've given it a value. In this case, the material app. All right. So we call this a bang operator in programming. All right, but we're not going to be doing this. All right, we're not doing any of these. We will just do as the documentation does and just pass in the material app, and that's it. All right. So also according to the documentation, we have to parse these. So we parse these here, and for this I'm going to change the size. So for the size, the first thing is the width and the second thing is the height. When you look here, you can see the width and we have the height. So this is the width, the design size width, and that is the height. So this is what it means. All right, the design size tells us, so we're trying to tell the screen utility the size of the device in the design draft. All right, so the current device that we're using for the design, what are its dimensions? All right, what are the dimensions of my phone, of my current phone? So that way it takes these, and then since whenever, so for example, if over here I've got font size 30, then on a different device, if that device is smaller, then 30 might be too big for that device. So how does screenutils know um, what dimensions or how to scale my font size or whatever values that I have? How does it know how to scale it? Because I've given it, it knows how to scale it because I've given it my current phone's dimensions. So if on my current phone this is looking beautiful, I tell it, all right, I've got this design done and it's looking beautiful on my phone, and my phone's width is 375 and its height is 690. Then it simply says, all right, so when we go on a different screen, maybe with dimensions of 200 width and I don't know, 600 height, it will divide and divide. So it would first of all divide to get the width factor, and then it would divide again to get the actual proportion that should transfer to that screen. Probably, I think that's how it happens behind the scene. I don't know. So we are going to get our current device height and width and pass them here. So how do we do that? So we can do that over here, right? So Flutter has got something called media query. So when we build our screen, if you want to know the dimensions of your screen, then you can use media query. All right, so I'm simply going to say final screen size is equal to media query dot off context. So what does this do? This finds me, it returns me the media query, so the properties of my current context, right? So this current context is the main context, the first context. So this is basically the first thing that runs, the first context that appears in our application. So this is getting us all of the properties, all right? We have a lot of properties from this. We have the padding, we have this that tells us if at the current position we are in the screen is currently accessible to navigation. We have a lot of properties. We have the current screen orientation if we're in portrait mode or if we're in landscape mode. It has the platform brightness. It has a lot of stuff, but what we're actually looking for is this, the size. So when we get that, we are going to print it, print the size, all right? But then, sorry, we're going to print the screen size, all right? But then we see there's a warning over here. It says to make the print, don't invoke print in production code. So that is right. In production code, when this code goes live on Play Store or something, you don't want to use this print because it will be trying to log to print stuff to your console when your application is in production. We only want that when we're developing. the application. Basically, when we're in debug mode, when we're debugging the application, what we're currently doing, we're building and we're debugging. So we can click this to make it conditional, and it puts in these, and we have to import. But that is a long way. So another way we could do that, Flutter has made that quite simple. We could just type debug print instead of the normal print. We have a debug print, all right? It comes from material. It could also come from foundation.dart. So even if, no, sorry. Even if we had, yes, this is foundation. So it could also come from foundation. It could also come from widgets.dart. So it could come from any place, right? It comes mainly from widgets and from foundation. But then since inside of material, we can see that material exports widgets. So basically we have debug print inside of here, and this one is inside of material. So basically at the end of the day, material will provide us with a debug print. So we simply print screen size as well. Then the problem is that debug print always wants a string, all right? It always wants this to be a string because when we're printing something to the console, we have to make sure that it's a string. So in order to do that, we say screen size dot toString. So basically almost everything in Flutter or in Dart has this toString property, actual property. All right. So this one isn't a value. This one's, I think, to call this one's a variable basically. All right. So it holds a value. All right. So over here I can't say .toString because this is a variable, but then to the actual value I could say .toString. So to anything or any object we can say .toString. I think even colors have toString methods. Yes, everything does. So we will simply print that, and we can see our whatever. So the app is running, so I'll catch you on the flip side. Alright, so we're back and the application's running. So we're going to check in our console to find the size. It should be the first thing that was printed, and yes it was. So this is our current device dimension. We have 411 by 843. So I'm just going to copy this and paste it here so it can work on other devices. All right, so boom, let's close that up. We no longer need you lot, so that's that. So now in order to use this, so the reason why I actually wanted to bring that in was because we're going to be using it a lot, because we don't want a case where we have beautiful user interface on this device, but when it goes to a device with different dimensions, then it gets queued up, it gets messed up. All right. So in order to avoid that, we want to use screen utilities to curb those excesses. All right. So as we can see, um, unlike the original design, there's some space, a lot of space between these two. And there's also a lot of spacing between these two, alright? So I'm simply going to add that spacing between these two. So this is our image and this is our text. And this is our image and this is our text. Alright, so we have something called a sized box in Flutter. A sized box is what it sounds like. It's a box that has a size, and we can specify its size. All right. So prior to the invention of the sized box, we usually use something called a container, and a container also had a height and a width. So we could give it a height 20, and we can see that we have some 20 height. All right. So we could give it 100, and you can see that there's 100. All right. But then the reason why sized box was invented is because container is more than just a box that has a size that you can pass around. It has of a lot more properties, right? It's huge, right? So Flutter is always finding a way to optimize your Flutter application so that it doesn't slow down when users are using it. So the container has a lot of stuff going inside of it, right? It's got a lot of stuff going on inside of it, all right? So instead of using this, so we can even use a container to build stuff, right? A container is almost like its own canvas. You can build stuff inside of it. So if you wanted to draw a square on the screen, so a square is basically something that has the same width as its height, right? So we can do that and save it, but we won't see it because it doesn't have a color. So we will give it a color, colors.red, and we should see 100 by 100 box container on our screen. If I gave this 200 width, then we'll have a rectangle because, yes, because that's what a rectangle is. So because it's got all of these properties, look, I can even give it a color. There's a lot of stuff going on inside of the container. We don't want to use that, so I'm just going to change this to a sized box. A sized box is a lot simpler and it weighs less on your device. So since we're trying to add only vertical space, I'm only going to pass the height instead of passing the height and the width because we no longer need that. So when I save this, you can see we retain that space, but then the color is gone, but it just looks a lot prettier, all right? But then what if we go to a different screen then, and then the 100 becomes too much? Maybe that screen only even has, I don't know. For example, my current screen has about 400, no, about 800 on the vertical on the height. This is the height, 800. So the first one is the width and the second is the height. So my current screen has 800 height. That is a lot. All right. So giving 100 space could work and this could fit in here. But then what if my screen was smaller than this and it only had maybe, I don't know, 200 height or 100, or maybe if it was running on a even much smaller screen. All right, so this wouldn't work because we're giving it too much space. So this is where screen utilities come in. Screen utilities will take the height on which you built it and then convert, which we've passed to it in the main.dart, this. It will take all of these and then get the current height on the device that it's actually running on and compare them, all right, and then change this value based on what the current height and the current width is, all right. So in order to use that, they've added something called an extension on numbers, all right. So extensions are basically a way, so you see how inside of ImageRes we've got to do, all right, we've got to do, and outside of ImageRes I can say ImageRes.to-do. That's great and fun. But then imagine, right? Numbers. I can't edit numbers, right? Numbers doesn't have anything that makes it adaptable on different devices. I can't say 100.adapt. There's nothing like that, all right? There's nothing like that. So in order to add functionality to a Dart code, to pre-existing Dart code, we have stuff called extensions, all right? Extension, right? You can see we can write an extension. We can say extension on 100 is an integer, so we can say extension on int, and we can say we could add a function to an integer, to every integer. So wherever we have an integer, we can just say void adapt, all right? Or maybe we can even return an integer again. So we can say return an integer adapt, and we can say maybe the current number um, in order to refer to the number that we've received here. This might confuse you, but don't worry, all right? I'm not going to go too much in depth with it, but then this is just an idea of what's going on with an extension. All right, so this simply refers to the current number that I'm calling this function on. So if I set 16.adapt, you can see that appears now as if it's a part of Flutter, all right, but as if it's a part of Dart, but it's definitely not. I just added that. So whenever I call this, this number will receive it by calling this. So whenever you say this, then you're referring to the number that whatever is inside of the extension is getting called on. All right, so it can say this dot, or sorry, this, so it can return this, meaning the current number 16 times 2. All right, so when we do that, you can see that this can't be constant. So when we do that, what is wrong this time? Oh, it's an integer and this one's a double. Yeah, whatever. So let me replace this with a double, whatever. So when we do that, you can see that the size of this doubles. All right, so the size of this has doubled. the size of the text of my screen has doubled. And that's basically what happens. So you can add your own functionality to pre-existing Dart functionalities. All right, so I'm going to add back the constant, telling us that the text is a constant. So, but then to this, Screen Utilities has created their own extensions. All right, so to something like this, we could have something called .h, meaning .height. It simply, let's read what it does. It sets the height, all right? So it says screen utilities.set height. When we click on that, we can see that it calls screen utils.set height. We can see that it's an extension as well on numbers. So numbers is a type. Num is a type that includes both doubles and integers alike, all right? So both doubles and integers, they all fall under this one large function, all right? So we see that we do when we call h or w, this one sets the height and this one sets the width to some, look, it scales it, highly adaptable to the device according to the UI design. It's recommended to use this method to achieve a high degree of adaptation when it is found that one screen in the UI design does not match the current style effect, or if there is a difference in shape. Alright, so we add that H and it automatically finds the scale for our current device compared to the device that we used in development. All right, so we add that H and then we see what happens. So it would be the same over here, all right? It will be the same 100 over here, but then on a smaller screen it will adapt. It will totally adapt, all right? So that said, let's add another sized box between the two texts. Sorry, sized box. Yes. So for that one, let me see. What height are we going to give to you? Let's give it a... Let me give it 10 then. Sorry, a height. And the height is going to be 10.h. Alright. So now we have a little bit of space between the both of them. But then remember that we're programmers, meaning that we're human, so we can forget easily. If an AI was writing this code, then it could easily remember each time that it wanted to add space to use the H, to always use the H, always remembers because it's an AI. So, but then we're human, we forget. I might be, I don't know, days into this code and then I have to put some space between two things and I forget to add the H to make it adapt and I just leave it as 10. All right, and then later on when the application is in production, something happens and someone runs it on a smaller screen and it doesn't adapt. So in order to prevent ourselves from making these mistakes, we invent ways to do this, all right? We abstract things, we make things reusable, all right? So for example, this to do, we did all of this in order to prevent ourselves from making mistakes with strings, all right? So for that reason, we're going to do the same with these. So we want so that every single time we call a size box, or every single time that we do any spacing between stuff, all right, that it always implicitly adds this. It always will add this h to it, no matter what it is. All right. So for that, we're gonna create a. I don't want to create a function. Let's create a widget that adds space. All right. So let us go into the core folder, create a new directory called widget. So no, let's inside of the core we will have common, which means, so when I say common, it means this whatever is inside this folder is common amongst features. So the authentication feature uses that thing, and then the onboarding also uses it. To do also could use it. So but then when I have something inside of the authentication, it means this thing is only going to be used by the authentication feature and no one outside of authentication should use it. All right, so this is all part of the architecture that I was talking about. So when someone else, another programmer, decides to touch my code and then he thinks, all right, this is something that affects all all features, then where would they go to look for that thing? Everyone would know to go to core. So the core folder means something that is used across the board. All right, so sorry that I forgot to mention that earlier. So the common is basically, I just don't want to put all of my core stuff in the same directory, so I want to do some neat abstraction. So I'm going to create a common folder. All right, inside of the common, I'm going to create a widgets. So the widgets that are going to be used across the board. All right, so widgets, inside of widgets, we're going to have a new Dart file. What are we going to call it? We can call it WhiteSpace. All right, so I'm going to have to import material because I'm going to create a widget, and I'm going to create a class WhiteSpace extends stateless widget. All right, and I'm going to give it constant WhiteSpace. And then WhiteSpace is going to have two properties. It's either going to have, so first of all, it's going to have the super.key. Remember the key, right? The key is from this person, right? So he wants a key, so we give him the key, all right? But we're not going to use that, at least not now, or not in this project at least. So before that though, or say after that, we're going to have two properties. The first one is going to be the width. So the reason why I'm passing, all right, do you know what? In order not to confuse you, let's just go with the height then. All right, so it's going to be a double height. Sorry, we need to use lowercase, so height. So I'm actually just going to give it a height. All right, required this dot height. So we are collecting the height. Let me put this before this one just to have some conventionality in my code. All right, so you can leave it here or there, but I just prefer to make the required ones come before the non-required ones as well. So what are we going to do? We're going to override the build function. It takes build context, and then we return something. What are we going to return? We'll return a size box, and then we can pass it the height. And then the height will be the height dot h. Remember, so if I called WhiteSpace and I gave it the height as this as 10, then it will put 10 in here and then call .h on it. So that way I don't have to remember to always call .h. I do it once here, and then every other time I can just say WhiteSpace. I can just say WhiteSpace, and I can give it height 10. See that? See that? That works now. Alright, so that will automatically add 10, or so it was 100. It will automatically add 100, and then inside of here it will add the .h. Alright, so that works. Let me do the same here. Space, don't add the .h. We can simply do that, and that's it. Alright, so that's how that works. Let me go over it again. So what we're basically doing, we're taking the size box and we're doing the same thing, but then just adding the h1 place, so that every time that we call this WhiteSpace, we simply pass it the height, and we don't have to remember to make it h adaptable. Alright, so that's it. So now that we have these, let's go ahead and beautify these, because these texts do not look anything like these texts. We can see the fonts is different. So the fonts being used here is called pop-ins. All right, Google Fonts. When we go to Google Fonts, we can browse for fonts. All right, let's search for pop-ins. Sorry, I'm in the icons. I have to be in fonts. Where is it? Fonts.google.com. Search fonts, poppings. You can see it looks a lot like what we've got here. It looks really similar to what we've got here. Alright, so that's the font. So you can manually add this to your Flutter project by downloading the family, adding it to your Pubspec YAML, but then there's an easier way. Alright, Flutter knows that people use Google Fonts a lot, so they've created a package for it. So you can see Google Fonts has a package. It has 4,700 94 likes. So installing, we're going to go over there, do I taught us to do before, where you go to our terminal, paste that flutter pub at Google Fonts, and then we chain the flutter pub get command, and that runs. Yes, yes. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So normally, if we added the Google fonts to our projects manually, we would have to come here in our Pubspec YAML, and then we would have to add some font family stuff over here, all right? But that's not what we want to do, all right? So, and then if we added that here, then we'd have to come here and specify font family, right? And then we give it some font family name, so Poppins, because we've already defined it in our Pubspec YAML, it will find it, all right? And then we would have to add the fonts over here in the assets. That's a long way to do stuff. So we already have a simpler way to do it using the Google Fonts package. All right, so we will read through the Google Fonts package and see how it works. So we simply add the Google Fonts package to our, so they're using Lato, for example. If we wanted to use Lato font, we add the package to our Pubspec dependencies, which we've done by running flutter pub add Google Fonts. Then we import Google Fonts, and then to use Google Fonts with the default text style, all right, we add the Google Fonts as our style, meaning it replaces, all right, it replaces, excuse me, it replaces the text style that we've passed. So over here we have style, and we passed it a text style. So there are two ways to use this. We could either just pass the Google Fonts that we want and then give it some properties in there, or we could totally still replace it and then add our own text style inside of it. All right, so we could totally go this way. We could totally go and say Google Fonts dot pop-ins, and you can see every Google font that we want lives there. All right, so it will invalid constant value. Whenever you see this error, look for somewhere where you've used const in your widget and remove it, and that should solve that. So let's see if it has any other properties. It has background color, so it has background color, it has a color, it has a text decoration, it has a color decoration, it has a lot of properties that we can edit. The only properties that we are interested in would be the only properties that we might be interested in would be the let me see, we will be interested in the font size. That would be 16. We'll be interested in the font weight. That should be 400. Yes, that was 400. So we're going to leave it at that. I think the default is also 400. Let me see. All right, so the default is in 400. So we're going to give it a default. We're going to give it 400, which is normal. So we're just going to pass in normal. And then we're going to have a, right, I think that's it. So let me run that. Let's wait for that to run, and then we can. Alright, so the application is on now, and we can see that our font style has changed for this one. So let's do the same thing to this person. Alright, so we will use Google Fonts.plugins, and then we simply remove the constant that we have over here. So let's see that change as well. Right, so that's changed, and that's beautiful. That's beautiful, beautiful. A beautiful font. So next thing that we're going to do, we could see that in the original design, this was actually, um, the background color is actually gray. All right, so because we have that color and we have a lot of other colors throughout the applications, we have a lot of colors, custom colors that we will use, just like we've done for our images, where we've defined all of our images so that we can just directly say, all right, image.this image.that. We will also do the same thing for colors, right? So I'm going to create a new file in here called colors.dart. I'm going to have class colors. I'm going to lock this class up so that I can't mistakenly invoke it, because we need only static access. Alright, so I'm going to copy over all of the colors, alright, and then paste them here. So you can find these colors in the source code. You can actually just play around with this color, but we don't want to do that, right? We don't want to. Let's just leave it as is. So we already have chosen all of our colors, so let's just use them. So there's a lot of libraries exporting the color class. So material has too many things that it's exporting. So let's find something that has a lot less. You always want something that is exporting a lot less. All right, so I think Dart UI is exporting a lot less. I don't know, but I just know that material is exporting way more than anyone else. That's what I think. So we're just gonna have these ones over here, all right? So this is gonna be dark background. All right. So outside this class, we can actually use statics to access. So meaning that we can say colors dot something, the same way that we were the same way that we can do in normal. So if I wanted to give this a color, normally in Flutter we'd have colors dot whatever color you wanted. But then since we've defined our own colors, you can call this whatever. You can call this app colors. All right. So as not to confuse them with the normal Flutter colors, like the inbuilt Flutter colors. But then for me, I know that the U differentiates them, alright? So this is going to automatically import my colors. This is my colors, alright? So core res colors, core res colors. So we've imported it, and we can see it here, alright? So first thing I'm going to do is change the background color, alright? So let me give me a little bit. Let me close this up. Alright, so for the scaffold, we have a background color. We're going to use the colors dots dark. Let's use the dark background. So we have the dark background. Let me remove whatever. Alright, there's nothing I've messed up. It's all fine. So I'm going to do that and reload this. Right, so you can see that, but now our text is this, so we don't want that. We definitely don't want that. So let me change that. So for this text, I'm gonna give it a color. Colors dot no, we want our colors dot light. All right, that should turn white, some cream color. And we also have this one. For you, we're gonna use colors dot light gray. Right, so that's some watered down version of grey. So we're gonna use that. That looks pretty. All right, so we've got this down. We've totally got this. Right, so we're gonna go ahead and build the next part. The next part is going to be this little part over here, the skip, and these two things. So we can totally see that um, the we have the image, we have the two text and columns, and then we have these two ones, right, side by side at the bottom. Right, remember what I told you? I told you that. Oh, my app crashed. Sorry. So as that starts, I'm going to talk to you about rows. Remember what I told you about rows over here? You can go back in the video and see what I told you about rows. But then I'm just going to tell you again and say that Columns arrange things vertically, this on that, on that, on that, on this, and then rows do the opposite. Rows arrange things side by side by side. So that looked like a row. The skip button and that little thing on the other side, they looked like rows, alright? They looked like they were living in a row, alright? So in order to achieve that, let's create something, alright? Let's create the row. Let's wait for our application to start, and then we create that little row. Alright, there we go. The app has started, and we're going to start now. So let me see. We've got the image, and we've got some white space. We've got the first text, the title of text, and we've got some white space, and we've got the subtitle. And now underneath this, right, we want to have a row. I'm going to give it a row. Alright. So we have a row, alright? So I'm going to call children. It also has children, just like column, alright? And it also has a main axis alignment. The main axis alignment, sorry. The main axis alignment. For the main axis alignment, we will have we have a few properties actually for the main axis alignment. So for main axis alignment, you can see that it has a lot of properties. It has start, it has, and let me show it to you properly. So main axis has center. Center will put everything on the center of the row. So if we had 1, 2, 3, all of them will come. Do you know what? I will show it to you then. I'll just show everything to you. So let's assume that we had 3 placeholders, right? Placeholder 1 height, fallback height will be 20, and fallback width will be 20. So we have a box basically, all right? I'm going to copy this 3 times. Sorry, needed commas, commas. Let's see. So do you see what we've got? We've got these 3 placeholders, and they are all clustered up together. But we don't want that, all right? So if we this entire space is our row, all right? So when we wrap this row in something like a container, and we give that container a color, colors.red, we can see how far the row is. So this is our entire row, and these 3 are here on the row. The row has a property called a main axis size. The column also has it, all right? So naturally, by default, it takes main axis size dot max. This is the default value. We can change that to do main axis size dot minimum. So it will take the minimum space, and when we save that, you can see it takes the minimum space available to it. All right, but then we don't want that, because according to the design that we saw, everything, the entire row was taking. You can see from here to here, the entire row is being used, and that is exactly what we want. So we can leave it at the default row value, all right? But then what about these? All right, so our main axis alignments, yes, we have a few values for that one. All right, so we have center. We're going to play around with all of them. When we use center, we see it gets centered. All right, when we use space evenly, what happens to the 3 of them? They share the space. They share the available space, and we can see there's the same space here, is the same space here, and the same space here, and the same space here. We have another one called space between. What this one does is it removes the starting and the ending space, and then just makes them start and end in the row, but then it gives them the same spacing in between each other. All right, so evenly will give them the same spacing before and after the last and the first widgets in the row, but then the space between will take away the starting spacing, starting white space, and just give them spaces between each other. All right, so we also, that isn't all of it. We have end. It will take all of them and put them at the end of the row. What else am I missing? Dot space around. Yes. So space around will basically put them almost, I think it just does the same thing with space evenly, but then it just adds a little bit of space um on around them, like on the sides of them. You can read the documentation, so you can see it says it places the free space evenly between the children, as well as half of that space before and after. So space evenly, or make sure that the same amount of space we've got in the middle is the same amount of space that we've got at the back and at the back of both the first and the last widget. But then the space around will give them spacing between the children, and then take half of that space and put it before and after them. Alright, so we play around with these, right, until we find what we're looking for. And that's how this works. Alright, so let's go ahead and build that part out. So what we're going to use, I think we should use space between. That should work. Yeah, I'm going to use space between. So space between. So that should create. So according to what we saw in the design, we had this button and we had skip. So we're still breaking stuff down. All right. So remember what we had here. We had an onboarding. Inside of it, we had image title, subtitle. So we have image title, subtitle, and we have the main onboarding screen. And then we have what we have left is the skip and the swipe indicator. All right. So for the skip, we also have two portions to it. We have this and that, and we also have this and that. And that's where the row gets confusing, because remember, all right, we have, no, my app crashed again. We have to wait for it to start. So remember that if we use the main axis alignment to arrange them, all right, they would all take even spaces amongst themselves. But then with what we saw in the example, the button before skip and the button after skip, they had a little bit, sorry, the button before skip and the skip itself had a little bit of space between them. But then the after that part was created, then the swipe indicator on the far end looked like it was spaced between from the skip area to the other end of the screen. All right, so that might sound complicated to you. There's a lot of ways to go about creating such a complicated layout, but I'm going to show you one way which I'd use. You could use it any other way, really. So we're going to still use our placeholders. So basically we have this, so I'm going to call this one for my button, and after the button we have a skip. Sorry, we have a skip. And after the skip, we also have a swipe indicator. Sorry about that. I'm just going to hit command / and it comments that out for me. So we have these three things, all right? So we're looking for a way to make them get arranged such that this being the skip and this one being, let me see. This one being the skip and this one being the button before skip, this one being skip, and this one being the swipe indicator. The swipe indicator looks two, but it's just one widget. It looks like two, but it's just one widget really. So that layout that you've seen, we're going to try and replicate that with what we've got on the code right now. So in order to do that, we have this main row and we have space between. What does space between do? It pushes all of them to the far ends that we can see, right? But we don't want that, right? We don't. What we want is for these two to be here, not for this to be spaced far from this and this from that. We want this space between to work between this and then these two to be together. So in that case, we can take out these two and create another row for them, right? I don't know if you can see where I'm going with this. So we have a separate row for them. You can see what happens, all right? They get put together because I haven't specified any main axis alignment over here, all right? So, and I'm not going to do that because the main axis alignment would still just push them apart or something, because the main axis is also taking a lot of space on this row. Alright, so what we're going to do, we're going to give it our own spacing, the same way we gave our own spacing to the columns. Alright, so we're going to give it some size box between the both of them. Remember, the size box not only has height, it also has a width. Alright, and you can either choose to give the height or the width. And I'm going to give it, how much should be okay for that? Let me think. I'm going to give it 5. Let's see. 5 should be okay. No, that's too little. I'm going to give it 10. Yeah, 10 looks great. So we're going to say 10.h, and that should work. Alright, so this is our little spacing. We've given it a custom spacing without depending on this. So this is our little layout. Alright, this is our layout. And we are going to make this layout work. But then before we do that, we can see that we also have this repetitive use of h whenever we're in a row. Remember that in a row we used width. Over here we're using height. If we used WhiteSpace, WhiteSpace doesn't have a property called width. So we could add that property, right? So look, it's suggesting that we add a property named width. Alright, so let me go in there. Or do you know what? Let's copy what was already done in the size box, because size box lets us use either width or height. Alright, so this is how it works, right? You can see that the width and the height are they are not forced, they're not required. Alright, so we're just going to copy the same thing. Alright, so we will simply go over to our white space and we'll remove this required, so that way we can choose whether we want to give a width or a height. So we can say this dot width, and we can copy this and we can say width. Alright, so we can either choose to give the width. If the width was null, let me see, sorry, so if the width is null, so these can be null, let me see, they can be null. Alright, so yes, so we can tell, so what this means is you can see that the h doesn't work on something that can be null, because if you're going to make something adapt, it should be a number, not a nullable value, not a null. So at some point when we're using the white space in a row, we're going to be working with the width and not the height. So in that case, the height will be left empty. And when that is empty, we don't want to call .h on something that is empty. Alright, because that will cause errors in our application. So that way we tell it, alright, if it is not, remember when I told you before that if we wanted to promise Dart that we're sure that a value is not null, we can tell it with a bang operator, or what do you call it, an exclamation mark. Alright, in this case, if we want to say Dart, alright, I acknowledge that this could be null, and I'm also not sure if I'm going to give the height at all times, then you can tell it and say, you can say, all right, look, if the height gets provided, then use the h. If the height doesn't get provided, then do not use the h. And in that way, we use a question mark. So we're basically saying the height is nullable, and I agree. So if it's not null, don't call. If it's not null, call the h on it. All right. So we're acknowledging that at some point this height could be null. So if it's null, forget about this h and just send null to this. So at any point when that height is null, this whole thing will be replaced with null. This is what will happen. Alright, so let's leave that as this, and also do the same thing with the width. So we also acknowledge Dart that the width could be null, and if it's null, you call null and you forget the w that we're about to pass. But if it's not null, then pass in w. So that's how it works. All right. So in our white space, we could then choose to use a width or a height, and we can forget about this. All right, because we're already doing that in there. So now that we've got this working, let's actually replace the placeholders with our actual widgets. All right. So So the actual widget that we're going to use would be the, let's build out that, first of all, this one, the button. All right, let's build out the button first. So what is the button going to look like? I think it will just look like an icon. No, let's make it an icon. So we have the icon, and then we also, the icon is just the widget, and we also have an icon button, meaning a button that has an icon inside of it. So the button has an onPressed, meaning what happens when we press on that button, and then it also takes an icon. All right, so we could pass in any widgets in there. We could even give it an image, I think. Yes, we could also pass an image if you had an image, but we don't want an image, we want an actual icon. So where I'm going to replace that icon with what is wrong here, we're going to give it icons dot, I think, chevron on, yeah, we don't have that widget. We don't have that icon from the Flutter icons. The icons is also part of the material, but then we don't have the icon that we're looking for. That particular icon that looks white and round with an arrow inside of it. We don't have it in the material, so we're simply just going to download another package from the pub.dev website. Alright, so let's run over there and find the package that we need. So the package that I found that's got the icon we're looking for is the Flutter vector icons, and we can just copy this and go add it in our project then. So you can go read the documentation, sorry, if you want to. From now I'm just going to tell you how or what we're going to be doing with the packages, because I've already explained how the documentations work. So I believe we've added our package. We have to build this out, and the skip and the swipey thingy. So for the swipey thingy, we also need a package. I'm going to stop the application because each time we add a package, sometimes we need to do a code start, right? So for that one, we're going to use something called, I think a swipe indicator or something. So let me add that already. Alright, so we're going to add this also, so you can see it over here. You see what it does. Alright, you can see those. I will explain how we're going to use them. You can see all of this crazy stuff happening here. So let's go ahead and add that one as well. And after we add those, I'm simply going to use the icon in here, and yeah, for the icons, we're going to go back to Flutter vector icons so you can see what we can do with it. So you see they're also using an icon button as well. In here we've got variable name is the same as font name. Alright, so we've basically got a lot of icon providers to choose from. Alright, so we've got and design. These are all icon providers, general icon providers. So you can even take any one of them and search for them on Google and you find them. Font Awesome. You can see Font Awesome is its own person, alright? Ion icons. So this is basically someone in the Flutter community who has decided to gather icons from different providers and put them in one package, and he's letting us use them. So this is how we use them. We call the icon and then we choose what we want to use. So in this case he's using the material community icons star, and in our case what we're looking for is in here ion icons, I think. Yeah, so we're simply going to do that. So we're going to say ion icons dot chevron. Let's import that. No dots. Let's import that. Come on. No, we don't want ice cream. We want icons.chevron. I'm gonna go with chevron forward circle. All right, and let's give it. Let's use that and see. Let's run our application and see. So I'm just gonna add const modifiers everywhere in file. Yep. All right, so we can see that over there. You can see the little icon over there. So let's change stuff up a little bit. Let's change stuff up a bit. So for my color, I'm going to change it and say, all right, let's use the colors dot light and see how that works. Right, so that works. We are also gonna, I think it's too small to be tapped, so let's change up the size as well and give it 30. So far, so good. Right, so that's a lot bigger and we've got a lot of tap space in there. So yeah, that's that. Also we could just totally ignore putting that icon here, icon size there, and say icon size and the icon button, I think. Doesn't it have that property? Let me see. Yeah, it does have an icon size, so you can totally say icon size and you can give it 30, and that should be the same. Alright, so and now I can see that the space is a little bit much. Right, so it has to be close to the skip, so I'm going to reduce this to 5 again. Let me see if we've got an icon color. Yeah, I think we've got a color, but I don't know what color that is for. Colors.light. Let's see if I remove this and save it. What does that color appear? Yeah, so I think that color. The icon button provides the same properties and then just passes them down to the icon basically. So you can either pass them here or there, but for my sanity, I'm just going to pass them here, and then I'm going to leave the space as 5. But I'm still thinking that a 5 is too much. Wow. Alright, that didn't do anything. Let's ignore that. And then just give our skip, create a skip. It's going to be a text widget puts a text on the screen, in our case skip. Alright, and now to style the skip text, we will give it a style, still using, I guess, the Google fonts dot poppings, because I want to use that all over the place. I'm simply going to give it, let me see. What do I give to you? I'm going to give you a max size. So, first of all, let me give you a font size. Let's make it 16. And I'm going to give you a font weight. I'm going to make it W500. And let's give you a color. It's going to be colors.light. Alright. Right, nice. So let's remove that. Let's remove that red container. At this point, we no longer need it. Right, nice. So we've got that. We've got those. So for now, I'm going to leave the placeholder. But then before this, I have these properties that I want to add to every text, all right? Every single text in the application in order to make them fit easily or make them easily adaptable because uh, we've got to make these things adaptable to screens across the board, all right? So I'm going to have max line so that my text doesn't exceed one line. So if it was on a screen with smaller width, or if it was on a watch or watch OS, because Flutter also is able to run on watch OS, if it was on a watch OS, or for whatever reason the phone screen got so small, I want to force it to fit in one line. All right. So in that case, we set the max lines to one. So if it gets to a point where the text can no longer fit in one line, what does it do? It wraps it onto the next line. That's what it does. It puts it onto the next line. All right. So, and for that reason, we're going to turn off soft wrap, and you can see what it does. Whether text should break, a soft line breaks. So we don't want that to happen. So we're going to set that to false. Why? Because we want it to be that whenever this text is too big, or whenever a text that looks like this is too big, then we want it to fade. So in that case, we're going to set the overflow. It has a property, text has a property called overflow, how visual overflow should be handled. All right, so by default, it's an overflow.ellipsis. This is what happens when you see there's too much text, and at the end of it, it's replaced with dot dot dot. That is the ellipsis. But in our case, we're going to use text overflow dot fade so that it just fades away gradually as it instead of you know instead of wrapping on the next line. And then in this case, we also want this to be aligned to the left, so we're going to use text align dot left. All right, and that's it. So I'm going to copy that, leave that the way it is, but then I know that I've looked through the UI and there are other text that I want to repeat this same process on. I will want to use this over and over for other text throughout the application. For that reason, I am going to use an OOP feature called abstraction, right? Even for these texts, right, to do with Riverpod, uh, this one particularly to do with Riverpod, I don't want it to move on to the next line. This one it's okay, it can move on to the next line, but this one, if it's too long, we're just gonna make it, like fit on the next, sorry, fade and not fit on the next line. So in order to do that, let's cut this text out and abstract it. All right. So let's take this and create a core widget called um what am I gonna call it? Let me call it fading text. No, fading text. Let me call it that because it fades. So we're gonna have import material app, and also instead of creating your classes this way, you can just use the shortcut stateless. You just type stless, create your stateless widget for you, and we're gonna call it fading text. All right. Fading text is just going to be our little fading text. Alright, it uses Google fonts and so forth and so on. Import library package. Yes. Sorry. No. Import Google fonts. So we're going to make some of its properties to be dynamic. So since we're going to be reusing them, the properties. So for example, when we use this fading text over here, right, and we replace this with a fading text, these things will be the same across the board. So everywhere that we use our feeding text, it will always have max line of 1, it will always have a soft wrap of false, it will always have an overflow fade, it will always be aligned left, alright? It will always have a Google font style, but then we want to be able to change the font size, the font weight, and the text color and the text itself. So in that case, we can remove these ones and collect them in the constructor. So we can say final string text, alright, and we can just say text. We can put the text in there. We can leave these ones because we want them to be the same across the board. For the font size, we can always say font size. So we want this one to be the same, we want that one to be the same, but then the font size we can collect in the constructor, and we can say font size. The font weight we can also take and say font weight. When we look in here, we can see the font weight wants a font weight that is of type font weight. Alright, so font weight is a type, so you can have final font weight. We can see this here, and it can also be null, right? Font weight, in case we want to use a default of 400. So we're going to make our default 400, alright? And then we can have also a color, a Flutter color, and we're going to have to call it color. Right, so over here we can have color. The font weight whenever it's not, because this person doesn't automatically set 400. At least I can't see them setting 400 as a default. I'm going to set 400 as our default. So whenever it's null, so double question mark means use font weight, but since font weight can be null, right, because it has a question mark, whenever font weight is null, then use font weight dot w400 or normal font weight, all right? So font size will be this. If it's null, I think it would default to some font size, and we also have the color and everything. So let's add this. And also for this, wait, let me move this here before you lot and bring you down. So also for the text, I want this text to be required, but then if we look in our text widget, we don't have to state something like this, max lines :1. We don't have to do text :text. How does that work? What they've done when we look in the constructor is they've put this thing called data, right? That is the text that we're passing to it. They've put it before the curly braces. So whatever comes in the curly brace is called a named argument. When you're declaring the value of it, you have to say its name before you declare it. But then whatever you put in the raw parentheses, you don't have to call its name when you're providing a value for it. So we're going to do the same thing, alright? Instead of saying required this.text, I'm going to remove this and put it here. But then have in mind that whatever you put here in the raw place, without being inside of the curly braces, whatever you put here is made required by force. So it's forcefully required. All right. You can add this and make it to be non-required, but that's a complex stuff. If you just want to make it not required, just put it here and just use this dot whatever. So we mostly do that one in functions and stuff like that. So, but then that's a story for another day. So for that, we're going to put that there. So it's forced, it's required by force. We don't have to explicitly state that it's required. You can try adding that, and you can see it will tell you required is not needed. All right, can't have modifier required here. Try removing required, and we're going to remove that. Say that it works across the board. So we can just come here, put the skip, remove these ones because they're forced. They're constant. They never change basically. And we're going to have our color, and the color is going to be colors.light. We're going to have our font size, font weight, and everything. So it's a fading text, and we're going to have constant to make it constant, and then we can see our little text. All right, it's the same thing, it didn't change. All right, so I also wanted that to be the same with my Riverpod, to do a Riverpod. So I'm going to add a fading before the text, and then I'm going to leave this text align. Do I want that to be center? Yeah, I do want it to be centered. So I'm just, do you know what? Let me add that property here. So text align, what does text align want? It wants a text align. So we're going to take final text align, and we're going to make it nullable. We're going to say text align, and then if text align is null, we are going to use text align.left, because this is what we want for all of them. All right, so we're going to put it here, this.text align. I'm going to command alternate L to format my file, and then I'm going to go away, and then I'm going to leave the text align. This time I want it to be centered. I think I want to remove this. Yes, I want to. I can remove these and that. I can use this as color. I think since I'm using this colors.light so much, I can also make it. We can also decide, all right, to make this one nullable, so that whenever we want to use light, we just leave it to be empty. We don't have to provide it. So whenever it's not, we use colors.light, because I see that we're using light a lot. So when you see that that's happening, you can put that into your main widget, and so that every time you need to use it outside, you don't have to make it required. Alright, so everywhere that we use colors.light, I can just remove the colors.light, and it will automatically, by default, so we're basically creating default values. By default, it will be colors.light. Alright, so that works for this. And now we can see that our little row isn't quite aligned properly. On the UI that I've shown to us, it was aligned on the end. It was over here. There's a way, so there's different ways to do this. All right, yeah. We could either use something called a spacer. I think the spacer is just going to push them apart. The same way a space axis alignment, a main axis alignment or space between would work. Alright, it creates a flexible space to insert into a flexible widget. A column is a flexible widget. A row is also a flexible widget. Alright, so we can save that. You can see it will push them apart. Alright, so this was what I described to you about wrapping this entire part in its own column, and then using main axis alignment or space between. You could just use a spacer, and that would work if this was what you were looking for, instead of having to wrap this entire thingy in its own column or its own container. All right, so that would work that way, but again, this isn't what we want, is it? No, it's not. So we're going to remove that. Another way we could do this would be to wrap the two parts. So we have two different parts. I don't know if you noticed. So we have this part. I'm going to put a space between them. So we have this part and we have this part. So one thing we could do is wrap the row in a widget called expanded widgets. Expanded widgets will mean whatever widget is its child, take the remaining space on its main axis, on the main axis of the parent of the expanded. So expanded widgets only live inside flexible widgets. And what have I told you? Flexible widgets are either a row or a column. Alright, and expanded only works inside of a row or a column. When you put an expanded inside of another widget, it will give you an error over here, and it will say you've used the wrong parent data or something. Whenever you see something like that, wrong parent data, then know that it's because of an expanded widget that you've used. So this will just cause them to also almost similarly do the same thing that the space has done. Alright, but then, do you know what? Let me try something. Let me see if we could use a spacer here and a spacer there as well on the top. So that way we have a space at the top and at the bottom. So that way they're fitting perfectly. Do you see now that works? That works, alright. So this is one trick. So this is one way we could do it. Another way that we could achieve this Also, yeah, I also noticed something at the bottom. There's no spacing, so we actually just want to do something. So we want to say on the bottom only use 20 spacing, but then that wouldn't work because we're using symmetric. Symmetric only accepts horizontal and vertical, but there's a way to do this. Since symmetric is also an edge inset, all right, this in turn returns us an edge inset. When you look in here, it has a return type of edge inset, all right, so we can say safely that this is an edge inset. And edge insets and a few classes have a property called copy width, all right, so you can copy width. Copy width simply means create a copy of whatever objects that you're calling copy width on. It creates a copy with the old values and then replaces the new values that you've passed to it. So right now we've got horizontal 30. All right. What does horizontal 30 mean? Horizontal 30 means on the right and on the left. Give me 30. But then we don't have a vertical. Vertical would mean on the top and on the bottom. So when I say copy width is simply saying, all right, let's take this same horizontal and create an edge inset that has a right and a left 30, and then listen to whatever this boy has got to give us. All right, and I'm going to give it a bottom, and the bottom is also going to be 20. So that way we have left 30, right 30, bottom 20, and top 0 by default. So I'm going to leave those as they are. And we can see at the bottom we've got 20. Right, so this layout could work, but then I was actually thinking of something else to do. Alright, do you know what? Let's just use that trick. Let's use that trick. It works great. It works great. I don't mind. But then, before we do that, let me teach you about expanded. Alright, so what expanded does is it tells whatever you've wrapped it on, take the remaining space on your axis. So if we wrapped this inside of this row, if we wrap this first row in expanded, it means take the remaining width and give this person a very little width. So whatever width they want, give it to them. So this person only has 20 width, as we can see over here. So meaning that if we wrap this row in an expanded widget, then it would take the remaining and leave only 20 for this person. But right now they're only taking whatever they can take. All right, this person is taking whatever it can take, and this person is taking whatever he can take. So that's how this works. All right, what expanded will do, if I wrap this row in expanded, expanded will simply say, where am I? Expanded will look up, look at this. Expanded will look up and it will see, alright, I am in a column. So meaning that I'm telling my child to take up the entire vertical space, not the horizontal space. If I was wrapping a child of a row in an expanded widget like this, I could wrap this in an expanded widget, then it would be saying, alright, who's my parent? Let me show you. If I wrap this in an expanded widget, then it would say who's my parent, and we see that your parent is a row. So it will say, alright, then I'm telling my child to take the remaining horizontal space. That is the difference between using expanded in a row and using expanded in a column. When we use it in a column, it will tell the row to take the entire vertical space, and that's why you see this stretching out. Alright, so what I was actually thinking of doing was just having an expanded widget over here as well, and then just giving it maybe a size box or something without any height, and see whether it would just expand. Do you see what I mean? So it's done the same thing that space has done, but then this placeholder is just, it's messing up. It's taking up all of the width. But then if I remove this placeholder, then this also works. Alright, this trick also works. But I think the spacer is a lot more succinct. We don't have to write a lot of code to use the spacer. We can just add a constant spacer over here, and then also add a constant spacer over here as well, and that would work perfectly without breaking anything. Alright, so with that said and done, we are going to build the next screen. So as you know, onboardings, how do they work? Onboardings allow you to swipe on them. You can swipe them horizontally. they're like rows that you can swipe. So let me show you with the demo application that we've got. So you can see that in the demo, sorry about that. So we can see that in the demo application we can swipe left and right and it swipes. Do you see that? And this also reflects that change. Alright, this swipes with it. Alright, so we are going to mimic this. Now how do we make this work? This basically looks like two pages. Alright, this is page 1, and then we have page 2, and then just by swiping our finger on it, we can transition seamlessly between page 1 and page 2. You can see that happen, and as that happens, this person is alerted. This person is alerted that there's a switch, and he follows suit perfectly, all right, and just switches with them. So when this one's in the middle, we can see that the white switcher is also switching seamlessly between the both of them, all right. So that's how this one works. But then we can see that these two screens are a lot similar. They're really similar. Just this one's got an image and this one's also got an image, but the only difference is this one doesn't have this title and subtitle. It only has a button, but then this remains across the both of them and it doesn't really move. So what's going on here? This is where you learn about a stack widget. We have widgets called stack widgets. A stack widget is basically like it sounds like a hamburger. All right, let me show it to you. So let me see a hamburger stack. I think that should be it. Right, so you can see, let me find an image. Right, this is a great image. You can see we've got a stack of stuff on this. So we've got the bread over here, and then we've got a vegetable over here. We've got tomatoes and onions. So these are placed layer by layer. If we could see the bottom of this, let me find one with a bottom. Yes, so we can see the bottom of it. So on the very bottom we placed the bread first, and we placed vegetables, and then we placed meat, and then we placed more vegetables, and we placed meat, vegetables, meat, and so forth, with some cheese in it as well. So this is what a stack looks like. You're stacking stuff on top of. I'm sorry you can't see that. Let me turn off my phone for a bit. So you've basically got a stack over here. All right. So you stack stuff on top of each other. All right. So this is called a stack. You place something and you place something else on top of it. You place something else on top of it. So far in Flutter, we've had something similar to this. We've had to use columns, right? Let me show you what we've done. All right, so we've used a column quite all right. We have this, sorry, in the previous screen we had this, and then we had this one underneath it, and then we had this one, but this isn't really a stack. This is just a vertical arrangement of stuff. A stack would have them on top of each other. So if you noticed, I have an image, and then I had a fading text. Why wasn't this fading text on top of the image, but the fading text decided to be below the image? That is the difference between a stack and a column or a row. So if I change this to a stack, watch what happens. This might cause an error, but I don't know. No, sorry, my code has crashed. Oh my day. So give me a second to run it. So there you go. If we were to use a stack, this is what we would have. We have the text laying right on top of the image, and we have the second text right on top of the next text, and so forth and so on. So that is why we didn't use a stack, because it places them just like a hamburger. It places one right on top of the other. So we are actually going to use a stack, but not here. All right, so what we actually want to do is what the plan is. Let me tell you the plan. The plan is to use a column, all right? But then this row over here, we will wrap this entire column in a row and then place this little thingy, this row on top of this column so that whenever this page moves, this remains here as its own entity, all right? It doesn't move with the entire column, all right? So we will basically have a stack, right? And then we will have two pages inside of that stack. So we have that movable, swipeable page, but then right on top of those pages, we will have one constant row that sits right on top of them, and that's how this is going to work. So let's get on with it. Let's start working on that. Yeah, so right away, I'm actually going to copy the things that I need for my page. All right, so for this page, remember this row, this little row. So let's remove our spacer. All right, this little row is going to be on its own. All right, it's just going to sit. Let me put it down here. No, stop. 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 Right, do you know what? Let me leave it where. No, I don't want to leave it there. I'm just going to wrap this in the second row. Give me a second column, and then I'll put this here. Alright, so let's just leave that row where it is. Alright, and then this is my column that makes up this page. So this page is basically made up of, remember that I told you that we have two pages, this one and the next one. This page has the image, the title text and the subtitle text. So we're simply going to copy those, cut those out, because this is our first page. Alright, so after our first page, we're going to have a second page, and we want them to be side by side and swipeable. In order to achieve that, we have a widget called PageView. So we're just going to use something called a PageView. Alright, so let me totally eliminate. I don't want to eliminate this. Let me comment this out. Alright, and use a child on this. I'm going to use a PageView. Alright. So this is how our page view will work. Our page view takes children. It's also like a row or a stack or a column. It takes children, and it uses these two children to create pages. All right. So if we had a page view, and let me see if I copy this and paste this here as well. So we have the same thing twice. Let me reload this. Right, so we have a little page view and we can swipe, and you can see that we have that. So that's how easy it is to implement this in Flutter. But we can see that little padding coming in. So let's remove that padding and only put that padding directly on the column. Alright, let's remove that and put the padding on the column. Also, let me remove this since we no longer need that second row. So I'm going to remove this padding, cut it, remove this padding, and put it on this row. Wrap with padding. I'm going to delete you. Alright, so we have our little, you can see now it works seamlessly. Alright, it moves between the both of them. Boom, bop, boom, bop. Alright, so, but then after doing that, we still want to bring back our stuff. We want it to be there, but stay there as we move to both screens. So we don't want to create the row here and also create a new row here where when we move then we have a new skip button and so forth and so on. All right, we don't want that. So we just want it to be there on the screen, and that's where we put a stack over the page view. So we can see that in the body we have a safe area, and in that safe area we have a page view. Alright, so we're going to wrap our page view in a stack, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to wrap it with a column and change the column to a stack since we don't have a direct way of doing that. So we have our little page view. Let me see, where's my child that I commented out? Where's my child that I commented out? It's right here. No, I can't find it. I think I deleted it. No. Alright, do you know what? We're gonna find it though. Let's go over to VCS. You can go to VCS, go to VCS operations, go to show history, and in our history you can find whatever you did before. So let's find our little row. Yes, this is it. So we're gonna copy that till there, I think. No, till there. Yes. So let's copy that and then let's close this. And then we're actually going to do this. So we've got a stack. On that stack we have a page view. On top of that page view we have this. All right, we have a little row. And let's see that row pop up. Where is it? We can see the row over here. All right, so we don't like this. We really do not like this stretchy thingy. So I think the stack has a property called directional. Alright, so I'm going to make it directional end. So it's going to be direction or something. What is it called? It's got a property called alignment. Yes, alignment. I'm going to say bottom center. Yes, so it's going to go tap at the bottom then. Please work. I hope it works. I don't think it'll work though, but I just hope it does. It didn't work. No. Let me try removing this. Alright. See if that's causing the problem. Yes, it works. So it actually works. So we can just use directional and put it at the bottom. So even as we swipe, we see that that skip button stays there. It doesn't move with the page. It just lives there. It loves it. It loves living there. Alright, so we're going to leave it there. And we are going to create our swipe indicator. And if you remember clearly, the behavior of the swipe indicator was that as the pages move, it moves with them. So meaning that it knows, it can hear us. All right, remember that we've added a package called SmoothPageIndicator, and that's what we're going to use this time. Let me close this one up. So our swipe indicator will simply be a SmoothPageIndicator. All right. So we're going to use SmoothPageIndicator, and it's asking for a controller. All right, so this controller is something that controls a page view. All right, so you can also see that page view has got a controller as well. This will control our page view, and then with that controller, the controller holds the current page that we are on. So when we're swiping, even as we swipe, the controller knows that we're swiping. All right, so we can see that the SmoothPageIndicator is smart. The SmoothPageIndicator is saying, I know that you've got a page view. For you to use me, you've got a page view. So I want to know when your page view is moving so I can move as well. So that I can tell your users, look, the page is moving. And in order to do that, I need that page controller that this person has in order to listen to it and know when he's moving so that I can move as well. So in order to do that, page controllers implicitly create page views implicitly create page controllers, but in this case when they create it we don't have access to them. They create them in here. All right, so if a page controller is not, Flutter automatically creates a page controller for itself. All right, it will create a page. This is a long code. If you look in here you see that they're creating their own page controller. All right, so we are going to create our page controller and pass it to this person. All right, so in order to do that, we can create final page controller is equal to a new page controller. This is just a widget. We can invoke it. It's not a widget, it's a class. All right, it's an object. So we can take that page controller and pass it here, page controller. So controller, and we can pass in the page controller. And we can also give the page controller to our smooth indicator. But then here comes the problem. All right, here comes the problem. The problem being that the page controller is in the build method. In Flutter, the build method gets called a lot, even without us doing anything at all. So it's usually bad to put whatever codes that you that is expensive, and by expensive I mean code that depends a lot on values. So for example, if I had a button that user has to click to change this to light theme, alright, so it depends a lot on the state, on the value of that the user has given on a value, alright, that value changes. And once that value changes, we want that value to remain the same till we change it again. If we are doing this here, and then imagine that the page controller is currently on page 1, as we swipe, then the build method will get called again in order to rebuild, right? So meaning that as it rebuilds, all right, so look, the initial page will be 0, its scroll position will be at the start. So that will just keep happening repeatedly, and it will be very ugly, all right? It will cause a lot of issues in your code. It might even throw errors. It should throw errors when you do that. So that we depend on its values, and we know that its values change depending on our actions or on the user's actions on based on certain factors that we want to control. So if you want to control the state or the value of a giving variable or something without having that thing change each time you do something on the screen, then you put that thing in the initial state, in the state of your widget. So a stateless widget doesn't have state. So in order to have state, we can use this a stateful widget instead of stateless widget. It's as its name implies, it's a stateful widget. It's a widget that has a state basically. So we can convert our stateless widget to a stateful widget, and we have this. So we have our widgets, which is the stateful widget, and then we have our state, which is where we can save values without having them rebuild each time. So it just provides us with a place to save values. So we can have our page controller over here, all right, and then we have this page controller over here, and then we save it. So whenever this build method gets called again, it doesn't affect this. This remains the same. If it was animating or if it was swiping from page 0 to 1, then its value remains the same across your application. All right, so we have that state over there, and we're going to keep the page controller over there. And then whenever we move away from this onboarding, we don't want this page controller to still be alive, because we want to optimize our application. All right, whenever we keep it alive, it keeps sucking on resources. All right, because these things are heavy controllers. We will use a lot of controllers in our Flutter application, like text editing controllers, to take user inputs, and when we're doing those things, these controllers take a lot of resources. So we usually have to dispose them whenever we leave this page. So this is also another thing that the stateful widget provides for us. So in the stateful widget state, we have something called a dispose method, right? It returns void, and we call it dispose. And this dispose method also invokes super.dispose. This is polymorphism at its best. So what dispose does is it disposes this state and whatever we've saved inside of it. So we're trying to say, whenever you're disposing this state and whatever is inside of it, please dispose my page controller. Don't leave it alive in the cache to keep sucking on resources. Alright, so we've disposed that properly. Whenever you create a controller, always remember to dispose it. So we dispose that, and we put the page controller here, and we put the page controller there as well. And now it's asking for a count. Count means the number of pages that we have. We have only 2 pages. So I'm going to give it 2 pages over there. And then let's see how that works. Let's save that and see what we've got so far. Now that's taking quite long. Right, so we've got this here. Alright, so do you see that? So it listens to that swipe and it changes. So that works, but then it's time to make this visually appealing. So we also want these to have this padding. I think this has a padding of 30 on both sides. Yes, 30. So we're just going to copy that. I'm going to wrap this entire row with a padding as well. So we're going to have padding. It's going to have symmetric. And symmetric gives us horizontal, and horizontal is going to be 30. All right, we can even do 30.w so that like it's the same across the board, but I don't think that's important though. So we have our little padding, yes. So we have that 30. Now everything's symmetric, but I don't think it looks nice. Let's make it 20. So that it goes a little bit away from these, so we know it's not even a part of the screen. So let's make that 10. Yes, that's a lot better. I think, I don't know, you can play around with it. Um, so let's design this because this doesn't look, the page indicator doesn't look like what we had. What we had inside of it was yellow, and then this thingy over here was I think it was white when we swiped through. So the shape of it was also different. So let's configure those. So it has a property called effect. The effect is talking about how, look how it changes between the both of them, right? It's a worm. It moves in like a worm. So we have different effects. When we go over here, we can see apart from the vector icons, we can see let's see, SmoothPageIndicator. Right, so it has a lot of effects. All right, it has the worm, it has the worm thin, so it changes to a thinner worm as it moves. But then we want this one, all right? So it has a lot of others. You can choose whatever you want. I'm just gonna go with the first one. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're gonna go with effect. I'm gonna go with the worm effect. That's what it's called. And then we're gonna go with the dot height. The height of each individual dot. We're gonna go with 12. Let's save that. Yes, now it's smaller. Let's go with the dot width. We want it to be a little bit longer, so let's do 16. Yeah, I think this is 16 is already the default because that didn't change a lot. Let's see. Yeah. 16 was already the default, so let's just leave that as this. Spacing, I'm gonna leave it at 10. Let's see what happens. Yes. The dot color, the color of each individual dot, meaning the color of the dots when it's not the current page. All right, so we're going to use our colors dot yellow. All right, and then let's make it opaque a little bit because look, when we use yellow, then it's just blaringly yellow. We want to make that a little bit opaque. All right, let's make it a little bit transparent. Sorry, not opaque. So with opacity 0.5, meaning 50%. All right. So 0.5 is the same as 0.5 is the same as 50%. All right. So we're going to make that 50% transparent and 50% opaque. All right, so that's a lot better. And then the main color, the active dots color, active being the color of the dot when the page is referring to the current page. So like when we're on page 0 or page 1, the color of the worm at that point. So let's change that to colors.light. All right. Let's do that. I think that's perfect now. So that works. So now we have to work on our little. So this is getting a little bit too messed up. All right. So let's do some abstraction. All right. So in order to abstract this code, let's move the pages to different files. All right. So inside of our onboarding, we have views. Inside of views, we have the onboarding screen. Inside of it, we're going to create widgets. All right. So widgets folder. Inside of this, we're going to have first page. All right. Inside of first page, I'm going to import material, and I'm going to have a stateless widget. I'm going to call it first page, and that's it. It's just going to be this. What does the first page have? It's got a column. Yes, the first page is simply this. We might have to import some things. We need to import our image res, our WhiteSpace, we also need to import the fading text and the Google fonts as well. Alright, we also need to import colors, and that's it. So the first page is set. So now we have only 40 lines of code. We can close this and close the Pubspec. Yeah, we'll close the image res because we've added every image that we need, and we can just simply come here and add first page. Alright, and we can make it constant since that's what it wants. And we can also come to the second page as well. Wait, something's wrong with my second page. It doesn't have a padding. Beautiful. I'm going to just go over to the first page. Copy that over. It's basically got similar stuff, but some things are different. So let's make this second page and paste this, and then we click on this, and then you can hit on your keyboard Shift F6, Shift function 6, and we can rename this everywhere that it exists. So second page, and this will change here and everywhere else. All right, so for the second page we don't need these two titles, so I'm just going to delete them. We only need a button. All right, so we're going to need a button for the second page. So let me see. No, don't fail. Do not fail, bro. All right, so let me add a second page. Oh, sorry. Constant. No. So I think it needs the constant at the top. So yes, that works. And I think this can fit in one line. So I'm going to remove this and use reformat code with Dart format. But then I hate having to do this, so I'm just going to use the shortcut Command Control Alternate L, and that should make them one line. I prefer it this way since it's going to fit in one line. Let's just make it one line. It's a lot prettier when we do it that way. Alright, so that takes care of that. In our second page, we can see this is there, but we don't have that second, the second one, the button. It needs a button. Alright. Now let's create our little button. So for our little button, I think before we put the button, we want our space to be 50 instead. 100 is too much for the second page, so we're just going to put 50, and we're going to use, Flutter has a button called, I think the elevated button should work. It has a button called an elevated button. It has an onPressed, meaning what happens when we press on it, and it also has a child. So for the child, I'm going to use a text. This, and in our text we're going to say login with phone. Alright, I'm going to style it. For my style, I'm going to use Google Fonts.poppings. This is actually getting repetitive and I don't like it. So alright, for our poppings, I'm going to do font size. I'm going to go with 18. The color. Alright, you know what? First of all, the font weight, I'm going to go with font weight dot boat, which is also W700. And I'm going to go for the color, and the color will be color dot dark background. Alright, that is a text color. The elevated button is going to be as it is this way. Alright, so we're going to edit this a little bit. It doesn't look like what we had, so I'm going to edit the elevated button a little bit. But then before we do that, let's style the button. So in order to style a button, you have a style property, and in order to style it, we don't want to create a style from scratch. We can actually just go button style and start creating a style from scratch, but the elevated button already has some properties, and we want to copy those properties and just change a few things. Alright, so when you look at a button style, it has a lot of properties. Let me see. It has a lot of properties that we can change. Too much. We don't want to mess with these things a lot. So elevated buttons already have a style. Alright, so when I say elevated button, the style from, what this does is it fetches the these default styles of an elevated button, and then it provides us with a copy with method. I already spoke to you about a copy with. So this is a copy with, but for styles. So for buttons normally use this. No matter what button it is, when you want to copy with its style, then you can use the style from method, and that will help you copy the style. So what do we want to change? We want to change the background color, and we want colors dot light color. That's nice. We also want to change the minimum size. The minimum size takes a size, so we're not going to make it constant. We're going to give it a size. We want 90% of the screen for the width. So take 90% of the screen of the screen width, and take 6% of the screen's height. All right. So I don't know if screenutils tells us. Let me see if it tells us the current screen height. I don't think it does. It doesn't. I don't think it does. I'm not sure what the default size is. It doesn't explain it, so I'm just going to leave it be and use the media query. So we can define a little media query. I'm going to call it MQ. It's good. No, we don't just want the media query. We want the size from the media query. So it's going to be equal to media query dot of context dot size. No, size. Alright, so for the size wants width first and then height second. So for the width, I want it to be 90% of the width. So the minimum size is going to be the size dot width. So the screen size, and then we're going to take 90% of it. That is 0.9. That is 0.9. 0.5 is 50%, 0.9 is 90%. And then for the height, we're going to take size.height, and we're going to take 6% of the height. That will be 0.06. Alright, let's see how that works. Yeah, that works. That works great. That looks great. What else? What next are we gonna do? Let's change. I don't think those borders, that border radius fits it. So we're gonna change the border radius. Does it have? It doesn't have a border radius property, but it does have a shape property, right? Oh wait, it probably does have a border radius. No, it doesn't. It has a shape though. Yes. So we're gonna give it a rounded rectangle border. All right. So this, for the shape, it takes an outline border. Alright, so we have different types of outline borders. So when you go to this, you can see it extends an outline border. You can click on the outline border and then click on the outline border again over here, and you can see everything that uses the outline border. Alright, in case you're looking for different types of borders. Alright, so for this one, we're going to use a rounded rectangle border. It has a border radius property, and the border radius gives us the radius of the border. Right now I think it's 90 degrees, because 90 degrees will make it look this way. So we want to change that 90 to be border radius, and we want our border radius to be circular, so we'll say border radius is circular, and we want to make it 12 and not 90. And let's see how 12 looks. You can play around with this a little bit. Alright, yeah, that looks a lot better now. So, yeah, I think that works. So, that should be all we need here. Or is it? What else could I possibly need? Ha 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 ha. Maybe, I think that should work. Let me see. Yeah, that should work. That should totally work. Alright. Alright, that works. That works fine. And we're probably going to be using this button, this type of button, in a lot of places in the application. Alright, and we want it to be editable. right? We want to be able to use it in several places without having to copy. So I think this style will be a great button style across the application. All right. So in order to be able to use this button style across the application, we're going to create a core elevated button that uses this style, but then has these properties, right, as dynamic properties, meaning they can change across the application. So when we're using the button for login with phone, we will provide it with these details and these properties. All right. So I think this is how it should work. So let's go ahead and change the properties and create a constant version of this across a core version of this across our application. So I'm going to go into our common widgets and create a new Dart file. I'm going to call it um, to do button. No, not to do button. That doesn't make sense. I'm going to call it a round button, probably. That should work. No, round button. So I'm going to do this quickly. Material, stateless, a round button. And we're going to paste what we've got in here. Close that. It's an elevated button that's got these properties. We want these styles to be constant. And we want our media query to be the same over here. Size.width and size.height. We want this to be the same. Border radius circular. But then the onPressed, we can define whatever onPressed we want because these buttons, since I said we'll be using them in different parts of the application, they will have different purposes. So when they get clicked, different things will happen. So we want this part to be dynamic and reusable. So we will look at this. It uses a void function. All right. So we could come down here and say final void function onPressed. All right, and that works. But then Flutter has already defined a custom type for void function because we use it a lot. So it's called a void callback. All right, when we click this, we see it's a void function, but it's something called a type definition. A type definition is a way of giving a generic name to long functions, all right, to things that have long names. For example, instead of actually always all the time, if you have to use a void function a lot in your application and you always have to write void function over and over and over again, it could be better and succinct to just use voice callback. All right, if you have something that takes this is more advanced stuff. I'm not going to talk about them. Let's just stick to this. Alright, so we have a void callback, which is the same thing as a void function, as you can see here. But then we also want to make it nullable, because sometimes we might not want our button to be clickable. So if that is not, then the button won't be clickable. And we also, over here, we want this button to have a title. So not just a text, a button text, probably. So I just say final string text. Alright, and it always will use Google fonts and it will always use these fonts, alright, these fonts properties. So the only thing that changes is the text in the button and the functionality of the button. Alright, so we will have required this dot text and then we'll have this dot onPressed. Alright, so let's format the file and let's come down here and use our round button. Alright, so we have a round button. The text is going to say login with phone and it's onPressed. It's not required, but then I'm just going to pass it because we're going to be using it sooner or later. So I'm going to just put a comma and format the file, and it automatically aligns everything for me. And yeah, I think that's it for this. We still have to make this skip work. This skip should just skippity bop everything and just go straight to login. So we're going to change that functionality later when we start implementing the login function. Or do you know what? For the sake of the tutorial, we're just gonna make it so that the skip button will just take us to the next page. Right? In this case, we have only 2 pages, so it doesn't really make sense. You could just make it go to the phone, to the login with phone. Just make it skip the entire onboarding and go to authentication. But for the sake of tutorials, since we already have the login with phone, I'm going to make this control this using the controller that we had. All right, so let's get to that. So in order for that to work, in order for the skip button to control whatever we've got here, let's find our onboarding. So we can see our onboarding is a lot shorter now. It's no longer hundreds of lines of code, it's just a little bit. We have our skip button over here, and then we can just put in this skippity. So for our skip button, we are going to do something with the controller. All right. So the controller has a property called next page. It's a function that pushes something to the next page. All right. Right. So it has a few properties, right? So we could say that the page controller, on the press of the skip button, we want the page controller to jump to the next page. We can do that using this, and that would work perfectly. We could also have animate to page. If you want to add custom animations, we also have jump to page. We have different things. You can explore these things, read the documentation, but the one that we're going to use will be next page. And the next page takes a duration, meaning how long do you want the animation of moving from page 1 to page 2 to last. All right, and we're going to do duration. We're going to use the duration. The duration, it wants a duration, and durations have properties. We have milliseconds, we have seconds, we have hours, you can see them over here. All right, but we're going to use the millisecond, so we want it to happen in 300 milliseconds. So we want the animation to take 300 milliseconds to complete. If we make it seconds and we make it say 20 seconds, let me show you what happens. For now, I'll explain the curves later, but for now, let me just use the isn't out. All right, let's do this. All right, so when I click this, you watch, and it will take 20 seconds for the animation to complete. Watch that. Do you see how slow that is? That is really slow. Oh my days. That is bloody slow. So let's change that and use milliseconds instead. So we want our animation to take only 300 milliseconds to complete. We save that and we go back. And we want this to complete in 300 milliseconds. Please go, please go. Yes, we can see that. All right, we can see that. But then this only works when we click on this button, but it doesn't work when we click on the skip button. Right, we want this entire part to be clickable. All right. Do you know what? Let's make it bounce when it gets it. So let's do bounce. I think let's play with it a little bit. Bounce. No, it doesn't bounce. Please bounce. So let me talk about the curves then. So curves are basically how your animations play out. Alright, so for example, we have curves.bounce in. When you use curves.bounce in and you have an animation, for example, this animation of a page simply going horizontally from one page to the next, we have, when you use curves.bounce in, this is how your animation will play. Boom, up and down. Do you see that? So if you had a translation animation, it will translate this way. If you had a rotation animation, this is how it would work. If we had a scale animation, this is how it would scale. If you had an opacity animation, this is how it would change from transparent to opaque, and so forth and so on. Do you see that? So what type of animation are we even using? If we wanted to define our own custom animation, for example, translate or fade or whatever, right? We could use the animate to, but we don't want to use that. We're already using next page, and they already have an animation described implicitly for it. So we're just gonna go with this, and we're gonna go with bouncing and out. I don't know what animation they're using though, so we're just gonna go with that one and go with bouncing and out. So that's how it works. All right. So, but then we want this entire row to be clickable. All right, let's go ahead and make that row clickable like I promised. So let's find our row. So this is our little row, and then we have our inner row that contains our stuff. All right. We can actually abstract this if we wanted to make our code more beautiful, but let's leave it. It's not too much code. It's just 90. It's about to be a lot more though. So we might want to abstract that. But then since we no longer want just the icon button to be clickable, we want this entire row to be clickable, we're going to wrap it with a widget called a gesture detector. All right, it detects gestures. So it's like its name implies, it just detects gestures like tapping, like swiping, like long pressing, like double tapping, and so forth. There's a lot of stuff that it detects. Right, you can read on this. Right, just like I said, it's a widget that detects gestures. All right, so we use that widget and we pass it an onTap property because that's what we want to use. We want to detect when it gets tapped and not when it gets double tapped, only a tap. And so we copy this and we place it here. Since that's there, meaning the entire row is now clickable, so we no longer need your boy. We no longer need this boy over here. The icon button. We only now need the icon because this onPressed is basically useless. So we just only need the icon. So I'm just gonna give it its size over here. Size will be 30. Color will be colors.light. I'm gonna remove this one if it's possible. No, it's not possible. So I'm just gonna delete everything inside of it and then find its root and delete it. So its root is over here. And I will delete that, delete the icon, and that's it. So now we can put const modifier over here and it edits this out. This is ugly. Let me put a comma there and we have our beautiful code. So now that entire row should be clickable. Let me try that out. So you can see that entire row clicks. If I were on page 1 and I clicked on this, then the row is clickable. If I clicked on this, it's clickable. Let me see. So now we can actually just add our WhiteSpace. And we're going to give it a width of say 5. Just to give that little space and make it look a little better. Alright, so yeah, now that works. Let's click on that empty space. So you can see that that empty space isn't clickable. Only this text and this person are clickable. So in order to fix that, the gesture detector has a property called, let me find it. It's something like, I think, hit test or something. Let me see. Hit behavior, I think. Yeah, it's the behavior. So we can say that its behavior should be to transform. Sorry, what's the problem? What is it? Alright, tell me what's wrong, sir. Yes, it's bloody behavior, so what's wrong with you? Behavior. Oh, I'm spelling it with the British spelling, I think. Yeah, there's no U, I'm so sorry. So the behavior will be a hit test behavior. If such a thing exists, dots. I don't think that exists, so wait, let me put this here. Because I really need behavior dots. Yes, so we want, I think opaque should work with what we're trying to do. What does opaque do? Opaque targets can be hit by hit tests, causing them to both receive events within their bounds. Yeah, this is just a technical way of saying that even the opaque, meaning the empty spaces, can receive taps. So you can see that. So you see that the empty space is receiving a tap right there. All right, so we can move that up. I really want that to be up there, so let's leave it there, and yeah, that works fine, and that works beautifully. So that's our what's happened here? Where's our bottom border? What have I done? Silly me. Our row has a padding, doesn't it? Horizontal 10. Oh, I forgot to add the copy width, and then we have the bottom to be 20. And let's do that. Oh, I think that should work. Yes. No, it's 20 too much. Let's make it 10 then. Or we can make it 15, I don't know. I don't care really. Just it works, so that's all that matters now. So after that, we are done with our onboarding feature, and that's it. That's it, guys. That is the onboarding done. We can close this chapter. So in the onboarding, we didn't talk to the back end, so there's no need for the repository and the controller, so we can go ahead and delete these. All right, delete, delete. Right, and we have those two deleted. Now we are going to move on to the authentication, which will have us talking to the Firebase server to log in with our phone, and so forth and so on. And we also get to work with Riverpod because we have to, save a user.